GHAZZY to start out this interview.
Yeah, hi guys, welcome into the Tavern Talk podcast with me and Darth Microtransaction, and welcome in Robert and Robert, I can't even speak anymore. Mark and Jonathan. That's a good start to this little episode. Welcome in, guys. It's been a while since we talked. ExileCon was a couple of months back now. Can't wait for the next one. So this Tavern podcast, what we normally do is that we usually call up a friend, and then in that position, we just have a main topic. In this time, it's going to be Path of Exile 2, and then we just see where the conversation goes. However, we do have a little bit of a good opportunity to provide some answers for the community regarding Path of Exile 2, so we plan on doing this one slightly different. DM can explain that.
Yeah, so because there is sort of a split of expertise here, GHAZZY is definitely a long-term veteran in the game, whereas I am newer into the community. The way we're going to split the questions is mine are going to be a little bit more surface level, kind of generic, type of things, and GHAZZY is going to really touch on the more technical type of questions is sort of the plan with it here. So first thing I want to do is say thank you for coming. Appreciate you guys agreeing to be on the podcast and coming out here as well. And I wanted to open it with a very open-ended, easy question to get it rolling, which is there anything that you were really excited to share that you haven't been asked on any of the previous podcasts yet, that you were kind of really hoping that someone would bring up?
So honestly, like you say, it's easy, but I honestly don't know that it is, because generally speaking, I like to keep all of these things in our back pocket to surprise people with.
Fair enough.
When things come up. So it's like it's sort of a bit hard to just be like, give me an unannounced feature is effectively what you're telling me.
Well,
to do.
I'll go. That's fair enough. I'll go with one that I had off the top of my head then, which is that Blight is a huge favorite of mine. Now, I know some people really like it, some people don't really like it. I'm a big Blight enjoyer. Okay. And in one of your previous interviews with Crip, you mentioned that what you liked so much about the mechanics in the leagues is the ability to sort of change the way the game maps function. And I was wondering if you have anything in PoE 2 that you wanted to share in relation to, is there any other features like Blight coming where they kind of fundamentally change the whole nature of the map? It's sort of like a tower defense mini game. Do you have any other of those types of plans for PoE?
So we probably, other than the ones we've already made in PoE 1, we probably won't do any of those for launch in PoE 2, but it's something that we're always going to be adding. Because once PoE 2 is out, there's going to be the 3-month league schedule. We need to be adding these kinds of things at a fair clip. And whenever we're doing any of those kinds of designs, it's always like, usually what we do is we tend to be like, okay, let's find some random game that isn't an action RPG, get inspired by that, see how would it look if we did this type of game in PoE, that's that kind of thing. And that's absolutely something we'll be continuing in PoE 2, like doing those other kind of interesting game modes, like you saw with Trial of the Ancestors, with what if we did sort of like a sort of auto chess battler style thing in PoE, what would it look like, that kind of stuff. So we always like to kind of think about that kind of stuff. There are a few things. I guess I probably shouldn't say too much about them. There are a few things that in PoE 2 that will be a little bit familiar, but also a little bit different along these lines. But they're not technically new in the sense that like they're similar stuff to what we've done before. But there are a few things like that going on. But I mean, there'll be lots more of that stuff when we get into league content for sure.
On that topic,
definitely.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Definitely, when it comes to the leagues, like we often design leagues that end up they lack that X factor, I like to call it, which is that thing that makes it feel like a different game. So for, I'd say even just Affliction as the current example, the whole like effectively implementing a fog of war was what we did when you're having to reveal through that, and that even that just makes the game feel very, very different. And some go a lot more far-fetched or out there, going back to even Synthesis, where you have the whole puzzle board and you're putting pieces together. You've got the tower defense. You've got the.
I mean, people didn't like the farming simulator that we did. Yeah. Well, that was I had a special place in my heart for Harvest, but people just didn't. Some people didn't like how it originally.
Some people like it, but yeah, what we do learn from that is the more out there you go, the higher the risk, right? Like, hopefully you can get the more out there you go, the less likely you're going to have close to 100% of people liking it. However, when those, what I like to find is when those things go core, they generally do a lot better. So when it's the league and it's in every area and it's something out there, you get very polarizing. Someone either loves it or hates it. But then when it goes core and then you can choose to participate in that, it actually is a lot better. So in the case of Blight and the tower defense, you're choosing to do that, and if someone doesn't want to do it, they just won't touch it, right? And that's awesome. And so having those different mini game modes where you get to opt in and opt out is like very important when it goes core. But yeah, it can be very hit and miss with the league and a bit scary.
Yeah, that's basically what I wanted to touch upon. Like you basically cover that, Mark, with the hit or miss. The deeper you go into it, like something that I really appreciate from you guys' side is the willingness to take the risk of trying something that is way out there. And those are like literally like it's a flipping a coin. You're either gonna love it or hate it. It's very few that's gonna land in between. But something that I felt has been kind of lacking in the last couple of years have been this whole feeling from the league mechanics to be an ARPG mechanic, which I felt that the Affliction was. You go in, you spend very little time in the Wildwood, and then you go out, and the mechanic is now you're going to kill monsters, you're going to get loot for it. And, comparing that to things like Sanctum or the auto battle chest, for example, these kind of approaches to the game just feels like you're now no longer playing an ARPG kind of thing. Is that something you're taking into consideration when you're coming into the implementation of new leagues in PoE 2?
I mean, we do have to care about that quite a lot, and in fact, this is one of the things that came up with Blight in particular, which was that when we initially were talking about Blight, we were kind of like, okay, the first discussion was, what if it was just straight up tower defense? You didn't have to fight yourself at all. But the problem with that, of course, is that, then it's not an action RPG at that point. So we do have to care about that quite a lot. But at the same time, like, it has to be a balance because, you need to find sort of some way to kind of split the difference between like feeling like at the end of the day, you still want to fight monsters and kill them and get loot, right? Like that's important. We need to always make sure we're maintaining that part. But it's like, ideally we're sort of able to make things feel like something you've not done before, sort of outside of that. And it's interesting that you sort of say that we haven't kind of done that as well recently. Like, I mean, I guess if you look at something like Trial of the Ancestors, that definitely was a very different formula, right? Like that is not like doing that is not like at all what you do in the rest of the game. But I think at some point we kind of have to be able to embrace things like that because otherwise we just, when it comes to having interesting side content later, unless you kind of do something like that, I don't think it's possible to kind of actually get something that really makes it feel like another very different endgame system in the end. So I do think it is actually important to differentiate quite a bit in our leagues if we can.
To follow up on that and kind of continue the conversation on league mechanics, you've mentioned in some of your previous interviews that one of the ones you really enjoy is Delve in particular. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of wondering, going into PoE 2, from my understanding, Delve is one of the only infinite scaling sort of game modes in the game. I think it caps at 6,000, so I've been told, but I'm still learning that part of it. So, what is your philosophy on approaching infinite scaling content in regards to PoE 2?
I think it's something that we definitely should have, but I don't think necessarily that every piece of content should be something like that. Like, I think it's nice to have a few cases like that. I do actually have a particular place in my heart for infinite maps. In fact, we were kind of, it would have been nice, and like we discussed, although probably didn't have time to implement in the most recent league, having an infinite map for the Wildwood instead of the way that it's done now, where it kind of like I would have loved to actually do that and you sort of explore around like a giant map. Just because that's my thing. And honestly, like the reason why I mentioned Delve is because, it's one of my favorite things. I really love working on random map generators. And Delve is one of the ones that I did put myself. So I just enjoy that kind of thing, which is why I like that. But yeah, as far as infinite scaling goes, I think it's good to have a little bit of that. I don't think it's necessarily good to have everything that way for various reasons.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, resourcing. Affliction was at one point considered to be that you go into the forest and you explore the forest, and then when you leave and then come back the next instance, you're exactly where you were again, or you can pick a spot that you have revealed and you keep exploring, and it is an actual infinite forest. Whereas, obviously, that does require a whole bunch of resources we didn't have at the time. But and as such, we just went with you're placed in a random position in the forest, so you still feel like you're exploring. But that would have been certainly an interesting take on it. And then you would have had a map, and you could have seen like how much of this infinite forest you're exploring. I mean, we've had league ideas that have explored an infinite desert as well that you explore and figure out. Like, I mean, it comes up from time to time for sure, but they are certainly a lot more intensive, at least from a programming standpoint, to implement.
The one thing that's kind of important, though, when it comes to any kind of scaling content, is there's always has to be an economic cost to allow for it. Because if there isn't one, then that will mean that players will always choose the hardest thing they possibly can. And if there's no economic cost, they will then always choose the thing that's harder than what they can handle and then feel like the game is too hard. And this is actually a problem, by the way, that the current league suffers from, I think, quite a lot. I think it's like, if we were doing that again, I would actually make it harder to get as many wisps as you get in order to make it so that effectively, like, it's harder to make it hard, because like I think right now it's too easy to make it hard. Like, what in theory what people should do is, like, I mean, like, not that they give you this option, but in theory what people should do is kind of bail from the content earlier when it's at a difficulty level that's actually acceptable for them. And effectively what we did there, not intentionally, was make it so that you can make the game harder than what you can handle. And in fact, the entire philosophy behind the endgame map system was originally designed around this idea, because and this is just getting some random off tangent history thing, but originally in PoE way back, we didn't have the map system, and we had the sort of effectively scaling thing called the Maelstrom of Chaos that you could go through, and the game got harder and harder as you went through it. It effectively scaled a long way, like way past where players could beat it. And the thing we immediately found was that if you do that, the streamers who are really good, they all, like, go off and do like ridiculously hard content. And then the people who aren't streamers look at the streamers and like, oh, the thing you're supposed to do is go to this like maximum tier crazy hard thing and play that. And if there's no economic cost to it, it just means that people will decide to, like, will want to do that even when they're not ready. So that's kind of the reason why the map system works the way that it does. And yeah, I think the Wildwood doesn't actually like do that well enough, or we probably had forgotten that lesson to some degree. I mean, not forgotten it completely, but to some extent we weren't paying as much attention to that idea as we probably could have. And I think that's why the Wildwood ends up getting harder than what it should.
But wouldn't the solution just have been the possibility of just creating a port out, like league mechanic key to get out of the...
No, I don't think so, because even if you give people the option to leave, they won't leave so long as there's more rewards for making it harder. Like, they'll make it harder than what they can handle regardless of the choice. And it was certainly a thing we couldn't do once the league was launched, as soon as we identified this problem, which we identified like instantly, right? Like, as soon as we saw like what was going on, it's like, okay, we see this as an issue. We're like, the thing that actually we should have done is like make the Wildwood harder. But if people are like that doesn't look right to the players, right? Like, if people are like, oh, the monsters like in the main areas that are being generated by the Wildwood are too hard, then if the response to that had been, oh, well, we're going to make the Wildwood harder to compensate, that would not have been an obvious connection to the players as to why that's the fix. So that's not really something a change we could make during the league. So basically, if that league were to come back, then that's the kind of change we would make, and they would effectively try to find a way to make it mechanically so that the more wisps that you get, the harder it is to sustain the wood itself, so that you kind of get to a natural point of where you can't continue. And then that kind of makes when you go back to the main area, the monsters would be presumably lifted to then the point where you've demonstrated the fact you've got the capability to kill them. So I think that would kind of be the way to kind of make that work a bit better.
I mean, the main point there being you shouldn't be able to just freely set your difficulty. You should have to earn that difficulty.
Right, and the way you earn it is by demonstrating your competence in defeating stuff of that difficulty, basically. So yeah.
Speaking of difficulty, that kind of brings me to another question I had is, as a newer learning player of myself in the game, I find it difficult sometimes to understand where I am failing in terms of death. So for instance, I died to Detonate Dead and lost my hardcore, and it took me a while to even learn that what I died to was these red lines, detonate, explosion, corpses. So going into Path of Exile 2, what is your stance and kind of philosophy behind trying to teach people what it is they're failing to accomplish to continue the progressing through this harder content you're mentioning?
So there are a couple of things there I will say in particular. One is that, just to be completely clear about this, the way Detonate Dead is in PoE 1 isn't good. And Mark has a specific plan. I think he's even going to change it in PoE 1 before too long, which I don't know if you're happy to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you got two corpses on the ground, and they look like they're just two different bodies, and you don't know the life of those bodies on the ground, especially with the current just AoEing things down. And it is always bad for something like one of those things might deal 1,000,000 damage and the other might deal 100 damage, and you don't know. And so the problem with Detonate Dead right now is, yes, you cannot, I mean, aside from the fact 1,000,000 damage is probably unacceptable outside of the context of some bosses. You can't tell which of those is going to deal more damage. So we need to make sure that Detonate Dead, and I've spoken to other designers about this, and the tasks have been made to change this. There is a clear difference in telegraphing, or at least danger. Like you can see this thing is going to do a lot of damage, and this thing is going to do a small amount of damage before that damage is dealt. Whereas right now, both look identical. So if you take like Alira's DD, for example, or like Malagiro's, you've just got the exact same telegraphing on every corpse and the exact same timing on every corpse, and yet one of those corpses might deal 100 times the damage of another, and you just don't know.
So you were saying about having like red flashes was like beep, 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 getting stronger and stronger, and then the amount of time that it takes is longer when the corpse has more life. So you've got more time to get out of the way the larger the corpse is. So you kind of get this like the telegraph actually changes based on the amount of life in the corpse.
Yeah.
And that way, Didn't They Dead will be more visibly easier to understand. You'll be able to dodge it when it matters and this kind of stuff.
You should see it and go, that will kill me, and that will not, probably won't kill me.
Yeah. So Didn't They Dead certainly bad in particular, but probably the thing you really were after was the whole like some kind of screen when you die that shows you kind of what killed you and so on. And this is something that I did discuss on Reddit a bit recently, but I guess I can go a little bit more into that. So the thing I was saying was basically that getting some of the way there is easy. Like saying like, okay, like fire damage killed me, that's easy, right? Like we could make that happen really, really quickly. But the problem with that is that like, okay, it doesn't really get to the core of a lot of what really kills you. And I think it's important, like if you're going to have something like this, to really sort of tell you like why. So I think we can say like, yeah, like fire damage killed you. We can say, like we could even say with more effort, I think we could say like this skill of the boss killed you, but I think that's sort of fairly obvious as well. The harder part is, okay, shock is what killed you, because like when shock is on you, obviously you take more damage, right? How do you express that to the player? How do you let someone know that, oh, the shock that you had on you was responsible for a certain percentage of the damage that you received? And like what you'd want to say, like an ideal death screen, if it existed, would be like, okay, this debuff was responsible for 20,000 damage or something like that, like this like it actually would say that, but we don't have an easy way of tracking that. And it's like the whole that is coming up with a way to kind of like to assign damage correctly to different kinds of effects like that is quite a big one. It's not impossible, obviously we could do it. But it's just a question then of development priority. Like it's something that I'd love to have, but I think it's something that is probably like not quite good enough. But I do appreciate one thing that I had seen a suggestion recently that I quite liked is that when you die, it would be good to preserve the buffs that were on you so that you can mouse over them and see what they did. Which I think is a good idea.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it's not a suggestion that that we've implemented yet, but it's something that I saw suggested, and I think it's a good idea. So that kind of thing would be great. So that's one thing to be able to know. And then there's been a few people sort of suggested, hey, what if you just dumped what information you do have into the client log, and then people can make some tools if they want to around that stuff, which I don't love as a solution, because it's kind of like, like one day I hope we can do our job properly and kind of get a proper thing like this in. But like sure, as a sort of quick thing to do, that would probably be easy. So it's the kind of thing that I could see us doing as well potentially. I'm curious if you guys have any other things about mechanics that you particularly found that were killing you that you didn't feel like were well explained enough, because a lot of the times it can come down to individual things, okay, like Didn't I Dead, for example, really is like that's not good, right? Like that's a thing that we could definitely make better. There's ways to make it better without necessarily having to make a death screen. You just literally, I mean, people will understand what Didn't I Dead is if you got a like glowing corpse, flashing there. You're like, it's pretty obvious to get away from that thing. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff will help.
I got three things in this I'd like to talk about or mention. I think the death recap, first off, like I understand like there might not be an easy way to implement a proper death recap, but giving us the information, or more importantly, giving newer player the information of what type of element killed them, will at least give them some sort of pointer. Because sure, they might not understand that it was actually a lightning blast that killed them, not a firebolt. That's fine. But if they go in and they die 600 times to that, they will eventually figure out that 600 or 500 of those deaths was actually to the lightning, not the fire, and they'll look at their lightning defenses. So that's at least to some degree helpful, even if it is because of debuffs and whatnot, which comes into the problems with the UI, forcing us to look at one side of the screen to see what debuffs we had, no time to scroll our mouse over to see what it does, and then look at our HP or we're dead. But taking that aside, I think that just having that kind of access would give us the possibility to, at least to some degree, for newer players, figure out what it is that actually killed us. The other part had to do with DD. The other two questions, rather, the statements. First one is this DD visual improvement. This is planned for PoE2, and then you also want to have this in PoE1. Is that how I understood it?
Well, that was mainly for PoE1, but yes, both. And not for player DD, of course, because that obviously doesn't have the telegraphing. It's instant. But
but
yes.
but actually the changes are going into PoE1, and PoE2 will probably inherit.
I mean,
that,
to be fair, actually more on that. I actually am not outside of specific bosses. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of. Well, there were some mistakes in the league, in particular with there was that stag monster that charges and creates volatiles off the corpses it charges over. There were the green caustic cloud volatiles. Like that should not have done corpse damage as it was charging over them. There wasn't even any telegraph. You just died. And then we obviously hotfixed that in and removed that. That was just a straight up mistake. And sorry, Quinn, for your death. But there are certainly cases in where they're doing corpse percent life and they just should not be doing that. I think in the case of like Alera, and I think when you get twinned and one Alera can blow the Alera up, I think that's very cool. And I think context like that, it should stand. But yes, there are certainly a lot of issues. I wouldn't say a lot. There are probably more contexts, and I'm going to audit them all, and where corpse life is being used where it probably shouldn't be. But either way, in the cases where it is going to be used, we will do the telegraphing thing as mentioned earlier. Yeah.
So on the topic of clarity or visual clarity, telegraphing, we got to keep in mind, and I feel like this is something that's been kind of forgotten in many fixes and implementations in PoE1 consistently, which I hope is not going to transfer into PoE2. We're going to try to stick to PoE2 topic here. But I do want to point it out that PoE1 is currently played in a way where the more you see on the screen, the worse your build is. So if you actually have visual clarity, you can be rest assured and guarantee that your build is absolute dog shit. The less you see on the screen, the better your build is. And the less you see on the screen, the less you'll see these well-telegraphed things like DD and whatnot. Because that just means you're not AoEing enough. There's not enough effects on the screen for you to clear effectively. So DDs are super hard to see, and there was a lot of changes with the Volatile Dead before they were actually visible. Crucible is another example with the molten thingies that flew after you. You had to make them, I think it was 2 or 3 iterations of that before they were actually somewhat visible on top of the massive cluster that was happening on the screen with effects flying around, not to mention the bloom issues. And if that's, we don't know how it is to do the endgame of PoE2, but if that's the same kind of approach with the way we're going to be clearing enemies with a lot of fancy effects, add a bunch of MTX on that, the FPS goes down to single digits, and then we need to stay away from these so-called well-telegraphed abilities. What's the plan to fixing those problems in, I guess, both PoE1 and PoE2? Because I think that's a big issue, especially for new and newer players that are supposed to see these things.
Yeah, well, it comes down to effectively just making sure that that you're not necessarily incentivized to go to the point where you've got like ridiculous amounts of things like it needs to be somewhat ridiculous because you still need to feel powerful. Like that's important, but we certainly need to improve visual. Visual clarity is a huge part of what we're talking about whenever we're talking about effects. Like there's just a huge amount of that going on. So just to be rest assured, right? Like that is definitely a top tier priority thing as far as we're concerned in PoE2. But that being said, we still have to make sure that you feel powerful at endgame. Like we do. Like it is important. There's a lot of discussion I think about that people always they're going to slow the game down or whatever. But I guess I don't really think about it that way because that's not our goal. Like all we're really doing is like what would a game at endgame look like what does a good game look like at endgame, right? And that game probably looks like it is a bit slower than what the top tier stuff that's going on in PoE1 is right now. So it's not so much the question of let's slow the game down. It's more like, let's make sure that that it feels, you both feel powerful, but also still have clarity of what's going on at endgame. So that's just an explicit goal, right? And I mean, I also think that it is a problem, even just from the point of view of if a new player looks at a stream of Path of Exile and they kind of see, the crazy crap going on the screen, like they're immediately kind of like, oh my God, I can't even penetrate this. Like it doesn't even make sense to me, so that obviously has to be, there has to be some kind of something changing here for sure. So yeah, like what I will say is yes, like visual clarity is hugely important. Telegraphing is hugely important. I don't know how to kind of really. I guess there's not a lot I can say other than kind of like, trust me, I know. You know what I mean? Like, I understand. It's important. I get it, right? Like that's kind of really all I can say at this point, because you'll have to see it when we get there, effectively. But yes, things should be telegraphed. You shouldn't have just random deaths like that. Ideally, you would feel like when you do die, it's because you screwed up. That is an explicit goal of ours.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard one to solve. It's a hard one to even really think about. I mean, I know I was playing it last night, right? I mean, there's I don't know, 1,500 projectiles per second or some shit going off with tornado shot. Like, I mean, how are you expecting to be able to see anything on top of Delirium opening legions or 3 legions every 10 seconds, a breach, you're clicking strong boxes which are spawning packs. Meanwhile, you've got Beyond Demons spawning left, right, and center. And this is all, of course, under the labels of Chaos Orbs, Divine Orbs, Mage Bloods, Headhunters, and all that are covering your screen with of loot labels. And then, I think, as Jonathan said, you accidentally press Alt, and then you go back to login screen. Like, I mean, how do you fix that? Like, I know there's the easy answer of like, allow us to turn off all of the effects. And I know.
One issue at a time is how you fix it.
Well, sure, it is, but I mean, there's heaps of, it's very subjective as well. I understand, like, you can't telegraph anything in that circumstance. You're either just instantly dead at some point or you're not. And yeah, I don't know. This is extremely difficult to fix at this point, and extremely, like...
Mark's talking about in a PoE 1 context.
Yes, in PoE 1.
Yeah.
PoE 2, you get the fresh ground and you get to make it exactly how you want. And, this is ultimately the consequence of a large amount of power creep and specialization in the game. And like, it used to be that maybe there's only 10 players doing this, and now there's thousands and thousands of players doing this because of information sharing and everyone becoming good, and because there's too many headhunters dropping because of the amount of wisps from the league and all of that. But ultimately, like, a lot of people are also having fun because of that. But then you get into this thing, which is how do you telegraph and how do you communicate when that's going on? Yet if you take all of that away, that is the fun people are having. And so it's almost like these things come hand in hand, and then you have to do...
The solution is make a sequel.
I suppose so.
That is the solution.
Like, we actually have someone working on the alt thing that crashes you right now, and as an example, and you can look at that and going, that's fixing a symptom, not fixing the problem. The problem is there are billions of, let's say millions, probably actually millions of items on the ground, and you press alt, and it's just like the computational processing in order to show all of those labels is just like algorithm too slow. We will make that faster.
I hope. Like moving that keybind to something else, so people alt tabbing doesn't accidentally crash the servers. At least,
look, what we should do is just make it fast. Like, that's what we should do.
We can
make it fast. Yes. We can make it fast. It's fine. Like the algorithm for laying out the item hovers was not supposed to be a problem. Like, that was not supposed to be something that was going to be a concern. But yeah, it eventually became one.
But look, we will. Sorry, go for it.
No, I was just curious if this is also like a problem that has like emerged out of the later years, similar to how the game is unable to calculate more than 2.2 billion a minute since the poison caps being reached nowadays compared to when we started off, a decade ago.
Yeah, there are just limits that we reach. I mean, look, so the algorithm, to get technical and computer sciencey here for a second here, the algorithm for laying out item hovers is not a linear algorithm. It is a super linear algorithm, which means that the more hovers there are, the longer it takes to calculate each one. And when you've got an algorithm like that, it breaks down at some point, right? Like, so yeah, that's the issue. So we'll fix that, but whatever. Anyway, side note. But yes, the cap you're talking about is literally just like the like 32-bit number cap, and the reason it's the number that it is because I believe that we store it as like damage per minute. Is that yeah, that's right. There are actually ways to deal with that. Like life, for example, can scale above that can scale higher than 4 billion, right? Was there not a fix to that?
Yeah,
I think we did something where we like had like 2 stats for life, so that one can be like the overflow of the other, like something like that. So yeah, yeah, we should probably.
Yeah, so to bring it back to the PoE 2 point here, and you were talking a little bit earlier about clarity, and you mentioned new players, and I still kind of feel like a little bit of a new player myself, and one of the difficulties I've had as I've been getting into learning Path of Exile is trying to understand defensive layers and how like armor works and how evasion works, etc. Right. So I'm wondering, when we go into PoE 2, is there any plans in regards to maybe a little bit more detail in defensive structure, particularly? Like when I was looking at armor, it says, well, this reduces your physical damage reduction. But then, I have a million people in chat spamming me. Well, that's not really the way it works. And I got to kind of trust somebody else to teach me it, in other words.
I agree we need more information in game. And actually, this brings up another point as well, which is that in PoE 2, we're really trying to reduce the amount of hidden mechanics. Like we're trying to make sure that whenever that like ideally, if there's something hidden, we either remove the hidden thing or we describe the hidden thing. We don't have any kind of like sort of weird implicit stuff. Ideally, I think there might be like one or two like in the whole game, like one or two things that are actually hidden remaining, like very very little. We're really trying to make it all explicit. And the other thing as well is that we are going to try and attempt to put more of this information in the game in some way. I don't have a full explanation of exactly that yet, but that is something that we want to be able to do. Like I get your issue. So, and ultimately, the thing you really need to know about armor, I guess, if that's one of the ones you're talking about, is like the fact that big hits get through it and small hits don't get through it as much, right? That's kind of the main thing you want to hear, I guess. And like, that should be something that the game should say more explicitly. I absolutely agree. So we'll make sure we find a way to do that in PoE 2 because it is important, I think. And that just comes along with a lot of the sort of new player experience type of testing that, like, it's funny because in PoE 1 we never really actually truly did that. Like, we did it in, like, we read feedback and did stuff like that, but we never really like actually like sat people who've never played an action RPG down and like said, hey, how do you think this works? Like, that kind of stuff. And it's something that we're actually going to be explicitly doing for PoE 2, like to actually do like proper usability lab testing of like, okay, here's a random person off the street. How do you understand how armor works? So I guess we'll have to see how that works out for us. But
How are you going to make this work with minions and proxies like totem mines and traps? Because people still ask me after a decade if fire damage scales raging spirits. Like, how are you going to make that work without like getting a Bible-long tutorial?
I actually have some answers in this regard. So this is actually another thing that I think is another point that's come up a lot recently about the passive tree, and like is it understandable, this kind of thing, and we definitely agree that there are issues there. Like I think the mechanically the passive tree is easy enough to understand in terms of like, you allocate points, you get stats. Like that's pretty obvious, right? So it's really just a question that comes down to like, what are the stats doing for me? And we talked about this for quite a while, and we kind of came up with an idea of like, maybe what we actually need to do is whenever you hover over a skill in the passive tree, it should tell you what the DPS change will be on all of your skills. And that way you will actually know, like when you see a node, like, okay, is this node going to help me or is this going to do nothing for me? Like, what's the relative, like, compared to this other node over here? Like, if I've got this node that's like plus fire damage, like I want to see that the DPS on my SRS goes up or doesn't go up, right? Like that should be something that you should be able to tell. And the other thing that will allow us to do is make it so that if you hover over a node and it's not going to do anything for your build because it doesn't actually work, like, for example, like you'll see like a new player, for example, will be like, okay, if I get spell damage, is that going to increase the damage like they assume that it will increase the damage their minions are doing. That's just not going to work, right? So you really need to be able to see, is that, is that going to do anything? And so we basically said, like, let's actually try to make it so that you can see what the end result will be when you hover over a node on your character, when you're hovering over nodes on the passive tree. So that is a feature that we're going to have in PoE 2.
So I'm just going to jump out on a limb here. I'm just going to assume that OpenRL is the one doing this. And if that's the case, can we assume that we're going to have some sort of collaboration of in-game implementation with connections between actual PoE program and in-game Path of Exile 2 then?
I am not keen to have just Path of Building straight up in the game. That's one of those things where, like, okay, Path of Building relies on the ability to the difference between these two things is the Path of Building effectively lets you create items from whole cloth, right? Like that you don't, like you effectively just like, so okay, what would my character be like if I had all the stuff that I don't have? And that's actually not something that we're keen to do in the game. Like, it's one thing to show you what item you actually have in your inventory will do on your character, or like allocating a point that you have the points to allocate will do on your character. I guess for the passive tree, we'll still show it even for points you can't allocate right now. But that's a side note. Basically, it's one thing to do that. It's another thing, I think, entirely to be like, okay, like I'm just going to effectively make this character completely offline, which is, to be fair, like something that people will do with POB. But I don't think it's something the game should necessarily do straight up. I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to be like, here's like, I especially think it's actually bad for new players to be like, okay, go, like, because if there's a character like just straight up like path of building style tool in the game, then that's the game telling you that you're supposed to use it. And what that means, if you're a new player, you come along, oh, okay, I have to like plan out my whole build from the very beginning. Like that's not something that we should expect players to do. So I think it's a little bit different when you're like, okay, here's a third-party tool, you can work. Like people understand that stuff. But I think having the game be like, okay, like what would my character be like if I had a headhunter on when you don't actually have a headhunter? I don't think that's right. Yeah, something. I think that's the difference between these things. But I do think we can do a lot better with regard to showing you the information about what a given thing will do to your character before you allocate it or before you equip it and that kind of stuff. And that's something I absolutely want to be doing and improving.
I mean, this also comes to, just to reiterate on that one, like hovering over int. A lot of new players probably don't actually know what the attributes do. So you could hover over a 10 int node on your passive tree and it would show the change in energy shield and the change in mana. It would be like mana from 71 to 73 or something.
Right, and that's instantly going to tell you
not those numbers, but
yeah. It is instantly going to tell you what that's doing. And so effectively, it is more than just like your int's going up. It is in fact your spell damage is going up and this kind of stuff. So yeah, it is good to actually.
And it is very important to explicitly say when it isn't going to affect anything.
Right.
Because if it says nothing, you'll assume spell damage still affects your minions, or your fire damage still affects your raging spirits in that case. Whereas if it specifically says this does not affect your skills,
right,
you will then know, okay, this is not a node I need to be taking right now.
Yeah.
So this means that tooltips in PoE 2 will actually be accurate.
I mean, that's a rather inflammatory way to say something, but sure, I guess that would be my hope that in general tooltips will be accurate. Yes.
Because I mean, you spec 10% minion damage, and you look at your SRS tooltip, it ain't gonna tell you shit. So I mean, I'm just asking.
I mean, yeah, we will definitely fix that particular problem. Yes.
So I find the answer of this particularly interesting when you're talking about how the lack of something in the game can actually make the game better, specifically when you're mentioning POB. So I'm wondering if this comes from a mindset of what you want is the wonder of acquiring a new item, and what this new item I just got is the experience of the game, and what is this going to do for my build, instead of pre-preparing in your head that these are the items I need to acquire, and then you're going out sort of like a grocery list and, oh, I got that one, check mark. You're instead kind of incentivizing people to be excited by each drop as compared to preparing ahead for each drop. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I guess what I would like to say is that at least the game shouldn't take away your ability to play that way. Like, I understand, of course, that there are going to be people, like many people, who just like they want to look online for a build guide, they want to follow that build guide, and that's how they find that fun, and that's fine, right? Like, that's absolutely fine. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. Sorry, I'm saying that's fine too much, but whatever. All good there. But I do think that it is important that the game not sort of like allows you to have that organic experience of just playing it and discovering things. I think it's important that the game doesn't take the mystery out too early, as far as that stuff goes, and that's why I think that's why something like Path of Building just can't be integrated directly into the game client like that. There are a few other things like this where, like, okay, so this is a random one. Like, a lot of people have asked us. So in we have like we made a system a while back, which we'll probably put this in PoE 2, where you can get a file, like a build file, and import it, and then it will like highlight the nodes on your tree that you're supposed to. It's like a plan for what to allocate. And this is the kind of thing where, once again, I'm fine with a feature like this, so long as a new player doesn't see that and is like, okay, well, I'm expected to like plan my whole build now. You know what I mean? So like, this is the kind of thing where like I'm cool with the idea of like, if you've got a build, you can export that, and then if you go to a website and you like download this file and then like import it into your game somehow, you can get that. But I'm less fine with the idea that just immediately like you're like, okay, we're going to give you a tutorial on like how to pre-allocate skills before you've actually before you've actually got the points for it and this kind of thing. Just because once again you get that thing where it's like, okay, now I'm like I feel like I need to do this. So UI like that I think needs to be kind of like, maybe not hidden is not the right word, but certainly not surfaced to a player who isn't ready to know that. Whereas if you go to the forums and they're like, okay, download this like this build file and then double click it and it's going to go into your game. That's the kind of thing where like that's fine because you've already shown us the fact that you're like seeking this out. You know, you are looking for this, and then once you've done that, then it's like, well, yeah, okay, that's fine. We can have this kind of feature. But I guess that's kind of like, I guess my mind shows you a little bit of my mindset around this kind of thing.
It was a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think that when we were still trying to keep this a PoE 2 topic, I think we're bouncing so much around PoE 1 and 2, but that's kind of why I love having a conversation like this with you guys. Because we just go on for weeks upon weeks. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the minions, totems, mines, and traps, like we talked about with the scaling of them. You said that would be something that goes, the tooltip changes. I mean, that would be something to be fixed. But when we're looking at the differences of that, a lot of people, I think, have the perspective of that being the way it is in PoB, where it's telling us that, oh, the target is a boss and the target has this and this curses. That's not going to happen, obviously, when we're looking at a tooltip.
right.
But will this be something that we're going to see on launch for PoE 2? And is there an initial actual structured plan to have this for PoE 1 in the near future? Or is this something you guys are considering to possibly implement later? Or what's the time frame here, if there is any?
I definitely am believe we will have that stuff in for the beta launch of PoE 2. I don't have an answer for you for PoE 1. It's not something like, it's not immediate. Like, I guess it's the kind of thing we probably could backport, but that's not first on my mind at least. So that's more like Mark would be the one to that. I guess it probably is possible to backport, but maybe not. I don't know.
It's ultimately easier to decide that once it is finished for PoE 2, and thus we can see exactly what it would involve to do so. And yeah, it's hard to know at this exact time. But I definitely want it. Have wanted it for a very long time.
Yeah.
Hence why we're doing it for PoE 2. It's just certainly easier to do it in that environment right now.
So with
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So something I've noticed in previous interviews is you talked about momentum was a word you used, and that you have great care going into keeping your momentum carrying with each character, so much so that there's different animations based upon if you're moving, etc. And some of the moves, like rapid shot, I believe, you can actually fire at 50% movement speed reduction, etc. However, while maintaining momentum, I know that there's also conversation about Path of Exile 2 is slightly slower than the other one. So how do you pair these two thought processes of wanting to keep it fast and keeping your movement speed going while Path of Exile 2 is looking a little bit slower than the original, Path of Exile? So I'm wondering, what is the mindset behind continual flow of movement when it comes to the characters in Path of Exile 2?
I think actually that momentum preservation is actually a really important thing you need if you want to have things be able to be slower while still feeling fast. Like, it's one of those things where one of the things in PoE 1 is that, okay, if you have an attack that's really slow, it feels like garbage to use. And part of the reason it feels like garbage is because you don't have the momentum preservation. Like, that kind of thing really helps. Like, when you're doing a melee attack, the whole like full stop then attack thing just totally means that it feels bad. The momentum preservation effectively means that you feel like in your mind you kind of feel like part of the attack time was actually movement time, if you know what I mean. So like and effectively, like, so I've talked about this a little bit before, but we've got this whole step attack thing where if you're a bit back from a monster, you can effectively attack it from earlier, from further away than you'd normally be able to, than your normal distance would say, and we've got an extra animation to propel you forward. And what that effectively means is that the time that you would have spent running to the monster in PoE 1, you can now spend doing the attack from further away. So effectively get to have the attack be slower, but still take the perceptually similar amount of time as far as you're concerned. So that kind of momentum preservation stuff really works with that. But it has been quite a thing, like making sure that everything feels that way. And like, there's even some attacks that kind of don't make, like, there are attacks like let's look at ground slam, for example, which I guess is something we haven't shown in PoE 2, but ground slam is not a skill that you want to be moving towards the monsters when you're using, because it works better from further back. So you have to find a way to make it feel like the momentum is preserved while they're actually moving you forwards. So we've got this kind of like micro step thing and like some animation tricks and a few other things like that to kind of make it feel like you didn't actually come to a complete stop before you started it. while not actually moving you forward. And there's like all sorts of tricks like that. So it has been quite a process, but it is really important because it just allows you to make the game feel fast, while actually kind of like making sure that everything's still readable and you actually don't have quite the same number of attacks per second as before. But on that clarity issue as well, just because I had it in my mind,
sure.
While I was thinking about it, is that one of the other things in PoE, one that actually does make it feel worse when the attack speeds do get high, is that you can actually make attacks feel clearer even when faster if you take care in the animation to do so. So in PoE 1, they've got one animation for every attack, and in PoE 2, we have like 4 or 5 speed variations for each attack, and we've got them all the way up to rather quite high attack speeds. And effectively, like, you start removing certain flourishes and details from the animation. You don't you make the animation simpler as it gets faster, and that actually makes the character feel less frantic. Like, they're attacking faster, but they don't feel more frantic when they're doing so. And that's kind of a way to, once again, like, improve the clarity of the attack without actually having to necessarily reduce the actual speed of it as well. So there's a lot of tricks there that we're trying to engage.
Is that translated over to minions as well?
I don't know about that. Probably. I mean, I guess that would be a thing we could do. Yeah. I mean, probably not specters, not specters, but like, it'll work. But it'll work. Should be no reason why other minions can't do that. In fact, yeah, absolutely, they'll do that. I think the same team doing the character, the player character animations are doing the minion ones. So,
what's wrong with specters?
They should be doing that.
What's wrong with specters?
Oh, just specters use monster attack animations.
You're now talking about doing, what do we have?
So we've got 700 monsters.
700 monsters times what, 3
attacks each?
3 attacks per different type of attack. I mean, you're looking at, a few years of animation work.
If you wanted to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I've already talked to Chris about that. I pitched a really good solution for you guys with the specters. But at ExileCon, you guys presented the idea with the Pokeball effects, which I'm very excited to hear about. Is there any type of, like, on the Spectre topic, I also want to bring in Animate Guardian into this. Is there any other changes outside of the Pokeball structure that you guys have in mind when it comes to Spectres and Animate Guardian, when it comes to functionality, considering how complex and extremely anti-new player friendly both of these type of abilities are in the game right now?
I don't think Spectres need to be the most new player friendly skill in the world. Like, it's a kind of thing where, like, it's sure, it matters, but I think that it can be something that is, one of those things that can be a bit complicated. I mean, inherently, just the fact that it's that you're spectering a monster immediately, like, the possibilities open up hugely there as far as what can be going on. But there will be more changes than that for sure. Especially, I mean, obviously we haven't talked about Animate Guardian at all yet, but we do have plans for Animate Guardian. I don't like the way that it works now. There'll be a new way. The Spectres, we talked about the whole Pokeball idea for that, which we're doing. In fact, we've got implemented already. And there'll be more stuff I'm sure you will like with regard to minions. That because we're going to be announcing the Witch before too long, and there's going to be a lot of minion stuff there. So there'll be a lot to say about it for sure at that point.
Well,
and
definitely for things like Animate Guardian, we need to not have the behavior of, like, oh, it's going to die, unequip the gem. Right, that just needs to go away.
Right.
Or log out.
Or log out, I suppose. But yeah.
I wanted to follow up on one of the points when we were talking about attack speed, and you mentioned some of the ways that you can make the attack speed, look faster is by adding different animations or removing parts of it, and effectively, telegraphing that information visually a little bit more. Has that process influenced at all development time when it comes to things like the artists making these actual animations? Have you found that being any impact with development going forward as you're continuing to create content? Are you having to make multiple animations for each one of these? How's that been on the development side of it?
I mean, it takes time, but the rigs we have in PoE 2 for the characters are so much better than they were before that making like 4 or 5 animation speed variants for an animation in PoE 2 takes way less time than it would take to make one animation in PoE 1 on the old rigs. Like, it is just a massive speed improvement. I mean, the other thing as well is that our lead player character animator, Ed, is just really, really, really good at it. It's like he can make that stuff so fast. It's honestly incredibly impressive. But yeah, like certainly we do have to care about this because I mean, just the amount of animation that has to go into a single skill is quite high in PoE2. But you honestly have to do it to make them feel good. Like the level of quality for a player skill is so much higher than it was in PoE1 that yeah, it just takes there's just a lot more going on with that stuff. And I think the other thing as well, even for boss skills and stuff like that, there's a lot more care being taken these days than there used to be about making sure that like the skills all like respond correctly to like weird stuff happening. Like I remember being sort of impressed, honestly, when we were preparing for ExileCon, how not broken a lot of boss skills were with regard to things like CCing them with like freezing them and stuff like that. Like it honestly is impressive. Like I kind of saw that stuff and I'm like, oh, that's gonna look terrible. This is gonna look terrible. And then like actually they had like stuff to deal with all of those cases. Like it's pretty impressive. So you know, yeah, it is. But yeah. Having to do all those extra stuff definitely makes development harder, but it is totally worth it in my opinion.
Except of course when there was in the mercenary demos that boss and she spawns a baby to avoid more gross terminology. I mean, that one you had on numerous occasions where you're filming it and you stun her and then all of a sudden she has twins.
It spawned a second baby. I still have no idea what causes that bug. We haven't fixed it yet, but sometimes in that fight a second baby will appear.
It's there'll be some like precise stun timing where like she'll perform. I know the problem. I haven't fixed it yet, but and then she'll do the skill twice.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden there's two babies scrolling around, and I mean.
Still works.
Intended mechanic, maybe? I don't know.
I mean, in real life, sometimes they have twins.
Sometimes you have twins. Yeah. I don't know.
So a follow-up question. I mean, sorry, go on.
No, you go on.
I was just going to do a follow-up here because we're kind of talking the development side of things, and something that I've noticed that I liked significantly while my experience, learning Path of Exile was the music is phenomenal, especially on some of the maps. There will just be very, very good music. So something I'm interested to hear about is the music design going into Path of Exile 2. Do you have any plans to bring in like well-known artists to do maybe some of the tracks, or can we hear a little bit about how your sound and music design is going to be going into Path of Exile 2?
So we have two people working on music in PoE2, and they're the same guys who work on PoE1. They're very good at that job. Some of the music in PoE2, like a lot of it's really, really awesome, and there's actually a lot more going on even than what they used to do. Like a lot of really kind of clever stuff going on with boss mechanics. Like they've got like clever stuff going on with phase changes. Like the one the one on what's the mermaid boss called? Sorry, I can't remember now.
I think Diamora, the song of death, or the siren of death. Yeah.
Like the phase change thing when she does her attack, like there's a specific music cue that happens, like exactly like it's real awesome. Like honestly, like it's funny because I heard it in the sound booth and I was like, whoa, my god, that was the most epic shit I've ever heard. And unfortunately, it doesn't quite hit as hard on some random headphones that I normally play on. But yeah, they're doing some really cool stuff. Just little stings as well. Like I don't know if you. Like they've got this thing where like, okay, you kill the boss and you get this like little musical sting, and then it like fades down the music for the area for a little while to kind of like give you a bit of space to breathe after the boss is dead, and then like the music will come back in another like 20 seconds later. There's all sorts of little details. So there's actually a lot more effort going in actually to integrating music cues into gameplay events in PoE2 as well. Yeah, I just think honestly, Camille in particular is just really, really, really good at that stuff.
I noticed
we're doing
what you're talking about how like the boss cues. When I was doing Shaper, you go into the bubble and it doles down the music where it sounds like you got water in your ear or something. And when I noticed that for the first time, it was a super exciting part about that, which is what spawned the question going into Path of Exile 2.
Yeah, no, we're doing a lot even more of that stuff in PoE2.
Love that.
Yeah, we have. I mean, that's more of a sound, not just music. But like, we have a few other examples like that. We have this whole when you're drowning, like versus the Eater of Worlds, it's your screen starts to go to black and all the noise gets suppressed. It's meant to sound like you're underwater. And like our audio guy at the time, like it was during work from home COVID time, and he sent a video of like he had filled up his kitchen sink and he had like an underwater microphone, and then for the male characters he's dunking his head in the kitchen sink, just like going making noises. And then for the female characters, he's got his wife also doing the same. And I'm just like, oh man, the measures these guys go through to get this is amazing. So when you're going through that level of effort, and I mean, sometimes you go next to their desk and he's got a bunch of carrots there, and I'm like, okay, I guess he's just snacking on carrots. And no, he's holding up a microphone and like breaking carrots to make it sound like breaking bones. And I'm like, okay, I suppose, sure, I guess that kind of works. Like they go to some extreme measures. I know that's not really music, but it's still audio adjacent, and it's like so fun to see their process.
Mm-hmm.
That's so cool. Another thing I wanted to talk about, we talked about bosses. We mentioned a few bosses from PoE 1, and we know there's going to be a couple of thousand bosses to my understanding in PoE 2. But something I was curious about, this is a community question actually, was if the differences on boss design in PoE 1 versus PoE 2 in the form, or the question will be in the form of the idea of having a simpler version of the boss, say Shaper, and then there would be Uber Shaper, then we have Uber Elder, and then they coined Uber Elder. Like, will there be those type of the boss designs, or are we talking about this is a boss, there's no other versions of it but that version, and if you want to fight something hard, it will have to be a separate, unique boss fight? Or are we talking about different levels of difficulty per boss for the end game? Like, what's the plan there for PoE 2?
I mean, the short answer is yes, of course there will be Uber content. There will not be, or Uber boss content. There won't necessarily be one for every single boss, but I mean, maps, in the context of PoE 1, it's hard to envision this, but in PoE 2, like maps, technically they are the bosses from the campaign with slight modifications or in different contexts and extra skills and stuff like that. And so just thinking of random, like, you know, there's what used to be the hard back in PoE 1 a while ago, what used to be the hardest content was the core map, and you had the effectively what was Uber Malachi, just not with his own drop pool and stuff like that. So map bosses are already harder versions of campaign bosses. Except obviously in PoE 1's world, those bosses are often easier than the random rare monster you fought outside, which I do consider a problem. Like, it would be nice for the bosses to actually feel a little bit more difficult than what a lot of them currently do. However, when we're actually talking about things like Shaper, more pinnacle content, yes, like the Uber content is great. Personally, one thing I don't like, and I know this is a bit adjacent as well, is that the cost for accessing Shaper and Uber Shaper are identical, which means if Uber Shaper's drop pool is better, the cost of getting to Shaper is always going to be based around the rewards of the Uber content. And so people wanting to do non-Uber content now have to pay more money to get access, or in a trade league world. And I don't like that, and I do want to change that at some point. So that is at least a lesson learned. But like, I've spent the last few days talking with like Andrew and Sean and Damo, a number of our designers, about, like, you know, how can we make the next generation of Uber content? And like, I was like pitching things to them, just random thought experiments. I'm like, what would Uber Dominus look like to you? You know, what is like, and then we're just like, what would that be? I mean, you could have things like his Touch of God behaves differently, and like maybe actually like disintegrate sections of the arena, and like you could make an Uber Dominus. Like, it's fully doable. One that is equivalent or at the same tier as the current Uber Exarchs and Cirrus, etc. Like, that can be done with probably minimal work, to be perfectly honest. So these are just thought experiments. Again, I just go in these random, I'm playing the game and I just go on these random, like, what if we did this, and like just see where it goes. And so, yeah, I want even more Uber content in PoE 1. And obviously we want to see a lot more of that going into PoE 2. And I mean, all the way back to Adzeri, I think, was our first Uber boss. I mean, that's, you know, the access to that has changed, but it's held the test of time, so to speak. It's not quite in the same ballpark nowadays, but I mean, it's still pretty noteworthy, and given how long it's been there, it's done pretty successfully.
I mean, that fight came out before Ascendancies and everything. It was beautiful.
One thing I do want to make sure, though, going forward is if we distinguish, I want to make sure that the Uber and non-Uber content, they can have, like, for example, with Elder, you can have the Watcher's Eye and then the 3 modded Watcher's Eye, or a higher chance for Watcher's Eye, or say Forbidden Flesh and Flame, you can have the higher chances. But I would want them to have completely distinct, unique item drop pools going forward, as opposed to like an overlap. I would want it to be and at the same time make them not require the same cost to get in. So that would be a goal if we were to design any going further, just thinking about it now.
I just want to mention, for me in my particular position where I can't kill Uber, I can kill one of the Uber bosses, can't kill the other Ubers, and I've cleared all the normal bosses at this point, and I'm on Softcore Trade League. I'm experiencing exactly the issue you mentioned, where it's like, all I really want to do is bossing. I love the bosses. I think they're super fun to do, but when I go to do them, I'm basically losing money to purchase fragments, then to do the bossing, so I have to basically farm my own fragments. So the call out that you're saying there specifically, where it's like the Ubers and the other ones will have different pools and be worth it with different fragments, that for me, where I'm still kind of newer into the game, I can't just, trivialize the Uber boss and stuff. That's very encouraging to hear, I'll be honest.
That is good to hear. I suspect there is a good subset of people who like the fact that it's just allocate a node and then they get all the access they ever want. But
Sure.
I do think that was the wrong call. But I'm keen to see what people have to kind of say or weigh in on that one. I've seen a bit of feedback around it before, but I mean, now's the opportunity for people to, voice their opinion on Reddit after this, I guess, and I will take a look.
Do you feel like there are a lot of work and time and money invested into specifically bosses in this case that you feel are underused for future developments? Because I feel like when we talk about introducing new pinnacle boss fights as a specific topic on bosses, I feel like there are other bosses that are so fantastically designed, way better than Dominus ever was. And when you talk about Uber boss, you mentioning Dominus, the only thing I'm thinking about is Medved, Vorana, Uthred, Olroth. What happened to those? Very few people are ever engaging with these. And those boss rooms themselves are fantastic. The mechanics are great. People are barely experiencing them. Having access to those type of bosses, and for those of you not sure, no idea what I'm talking about, those are the bosses found in the expedition encounters. And making Uber versions of those was something I was talking about during Expedition League. I think that would be fantastic because there's incredibly cool designed boss fights. Yet so few people in the community ever get to experience them, even during the league, even fewer after the league.
I mean, ultimately, yes, I agree. It's those also cross my mind. I mean, I have mentioned the same things internally. I'm like, what about Uber Olroth? What about Uber Lycia? What about... There is a lot of that stuff, and there is room to add it.
I think one thing that's important to remember, though, is that it is actually good to have content that few people are able to play. Like you want to have some aspirational stuff, Like if everything is just easy to access, then it's just. I think a lot of people, they sort of look at this, only 1% of the player base will ever play this, therefore it's not worth developing. I don't think that's the right attitude to have when you're developing a game like this, because it's sort of, you just need that aspirational stuff. So just a random point that I thought of as you were talking there.
No, and I do agree with that. I 100% agree that, like, the moment that all of a sudden Olroth is found outside of Expedition or in some other ways, it also makes then Expedition less worthwhile to play and do, and less fun and less special when, like it can be quite fun when the meta is to do a particular league, and thus there are leagues that barely anyone's doing. But you can be the person then doing it, and because no one's doing it, those drops become valuable in trade. And I mean, Ultimatum is, even though it only recently went core, is probably a good example of that, where it's like, I mean, not that many people are doing it right now, and you can see that in the fact that it's like, 7 fertile catalysts to a divine, which you could argue is due to divine inflation as well. But either way, like, you can now be like, I'm just going to be an Ultimatum player and utilize the fact that very few other people are doing it, of course, in trade leagues. And there is some fun to that. And then, I don't know, I honestly can't say what the value of the Trial Masters drops are. They might be worthless. They might be worth a lot. I honestly have not looked, but it can feel special to someone that they are doing Ultimatum and getting to do that boss fight because he has a drop that's worth a lot, and no one else is doing it because it's not really the in-game meta. Whereas like right now, it's very much, I guess, Stygian Spires, for example, and you'll probably find that. Not that it ever is really the case. You'll probably find that the drops from those are completely worth absolutely nothing.
Something I wanted to check in on as well on this topic. You mentioned it not being worth running the previous version of it, and I feel like, well, what if the regular old Expedition would be the source to get access to these Uber bosses? But the only thing I keep thinking about when I was about to ask that is a core problem I think I have, which I know you, Jonathan, covered with Crip a little bit. You touched upon it, which was div cards. And I know this is something that brings back to some of the issues that I know that DM you've been encountering when it comes to wealth acquisition. And that is how like stacked decks and div cards is allowing players to literally have access to fight uber pinnacle endgame bosses before anyone in a new league start has even reached the white tier maps. That is what the stacked decks is allowing us to do in the current state of the game.
Mark and I are both rather unhappy with stacked decks. That's probably the only thing that I have to say right now about them.
Fair enough.
Yeah, there are issues with it for sure.
Well, like, there's two ways to look at it. I mean, yes, it was originally meant to be this like reward specifically from Putrid Cloister, and now it's like every second league's reward mechanic, and you're just getting them left, right, and center. But on the other hand, it's very fun to sit there and open them and hope to get the best thing. There's both ups and downs to it for sure. But what I do know is that with div cards in particular, right? It used to be that like, just thinking it from a less experienced player, right? Like I'm not talking like farming burial chambers for doctors and fortunates and whatnot. I'm talking like you're in the campaign and what used to be that whole aqueduct and you want to farm a tabula, so you farm aqueduct. You get your humility cards and get that. That's pretty far lost at this point, which I think is pretty sad. I think in solo self-found that has seen more, but I mean that's obviously a minority subset of the players. And not to say that we don't want to have the system work in both worlds. I'm glad it does work in solo self-found the way it was originally intended. It's sad to see it that that's not really how it works now for Core League. So you go into your map and you farm whatever is providing the highest economical value, which in this league probably is burial chambers, obviously Crimson Temples, and not only are you acquiring, your doctors every so often, you're getting your constant flow of fortunate cards coming in for just divine orb sources and whatever. But like, I don't know, what if I want to, just because I'm a little bit masochistic, want to run Ancient City? And like, I mean, like, not that I'm going to, just for the record, I'm not crazy. But let's just say I wanted to, like, because I like the tile set, or I enjoy the boss fight, or I enjoy whatever about it, there's zero incentive for me to do that in a trade league, economically speaking, because I'm not going to be getting these doctors or various other div cards. I don't even know what div cards drop in Ancient City, to be honest, but I'm going to assume it's not as good as some of these others. And I think that's really sad and that's lost. Now, if someone wants to farm burial chambers all the time, albeit to them, but I don't like the state in where you feel forced or obliged to farm a specific map, even though that might not be the map that you want to be playing because of the boss fight or whatever other factors. Or just the layout, like your build. Maybe you want something more indoor and enclosed, or maybe you just want something, more aesthetically pleasing or whatever. And right now, div cards kind of influence everything there. While also, sadly, we've lost a player wants to farm a tabula. It's just, again, not really happening. I mean, they can, but it's just not really going to be the case.
That's fair. I mean, wealth acquisition is always going to be a high priority in the state of the game trade league softcore where the vast majority of the player base exists. I mean, that's obviously going to be a main driving factor just as much as there is meta builds that the majority of players are going to, hence why they are meta builds, right? With that in mind, that obviously has a big impact on trading. And what's the philosophy in PoE 1, unless that has changed, is that it's too easy to trade, but you don't have any plans on, at least what I've heard, to neither make it easier or harder to trade. But that's PoE 1. How is that looking for PoE 2?
We honestly don't really have any plans to change anything in PoE 2 with trade, to be frank. Like, there's really not a lot. As I said, there's not really a lot, I think, that can change there easily without causing some kind of negative effect. So ultimately, we're kind of where we are. The most important thing, I guess, to say is that we are a game with trade. That's something that a lot of modern games are afraid to do. But we think is important. So, there must be trade. We don't think it should be easier than it currently is. And so here's where we are. So like I guess that kind of really is the end of it. But yeah, I mean trade's obviously important for many reasons that we've gone over many times before. But yeah, it's just super important that it's just, we want to be a game with an economy.
So I have a question for PoE2 that I don't think has been asked before, but hopefully I'm not asking one that's already been asked. Hotkeys. One of the questions I saw in the chat earlier was that a gentleman was wondering whether or not there is going to be additional implementation of hotkeys available, meaning you can have more skills on your bar and use them in any given build. Are we going to be locked into the same amount of abilities, or is there going to be additional action bars, etc.?
So one thing that is different about PoE 1 versus 2 is that in PoE 1, you could actually have more active abilities technically than you could in PoE 2 if they weren't supported. And so that means that there were cases where you were sort of incentivized to do that. Now you have 9 skill slots, and you can get more skills from items, but that's okay. In the case of the mercenary, you might have 4, but I really wouldn't. 4 is probably the most you would get extra from items in a character, for the most part. Which means that realistically, most characters will have 9 skills, and some of those are probably going to be reservation effects. Now, the UI for reservation effects, all right, you know what? I'm just going to say it. When you die, you no longer have to recast reservation effects.
Oh, nice.
So that means that the reason to have those bound is like no longer necessary. And so then the number of actual skills that you would want to actually cast then gets lower. And that means that you generally don't have to, the number of skill binds I imagine should be enough for the most part. So I'm not really concerned that, but we've still got the ones we can go control, click on buttons. And can you actually rebind those individually? Like, can you rebind? You can, yes, that's fine. So if you want to have more binds that are not like visible to you, but still there, then you can still do that just like you can in PoE 1. So I think that we have enough actually. But yeah, like there were some things we were doing to effectively make it so that I think just the way that PoE 2 is, it doesn't require you to have more binds than what we had in PoE 1, particularly. So yeah, that's kind of my answer to that.
And I do believe for controllers, you mentioned decrypted.
Yes, I've already talked about the way the binding works on controller. Where I believe the number you technically get is 22. But that includes other things that have specific binds on PC, like dodge roll and stuff. But that's another whole thing. Yeah.
Well, then I got another kind of not a follow-up, but another random PoE2 question I'm going to throw at you here, which is that, from my understanding, I've heard we're going to have more Toto Ascendancies going into PoE2, but I didn't hear in particular how we are planning to acquire these Ascendancies. From my understanding, Lab is a PoE 1 related thing, will not be in PoE 2. So are we available to have information on how to unlock Ascendancies at this time?
So we haven't announced the specifics, but there are Ascendancy. There is special stuff for doing Ascension, that we've created. It's different in each. Not to give away too much. There are different things you have to do to get the points. Like the first set of points you get in a different way than you get the second set of points and the third set of points. And so it isn't just like, it's not like there's one activity you have to do. There's more stuff you're doing, and I think it's more interesting than what PoE 1 had going on. So I'm not going to talk about the specifics of it, but effectively, there are quests. There's a quest in Act 2. There's a quest in Act 3. There's a quest in Act 4, and they're pretty interesting things, I think.
And just to note, he's saying 3 things. There are 4 sets of points.
Oh yeah, there is an in-game one, an in-game set as well. But that's there's the in-game set as well, of course.
Yeah. I mean, anything but the lab will make me happy, so I'm good.
Okay, well, hopefully that will be the case.
Yeah, Trap's coming back to the game. Follow-up question.
We definitely. Well, okay. I'll answer that seriously.
Please do. Actually, I want to know. I die to those all the time.
Yeah.
We do appreciate the fact that people don't love the trap gauntlets in Lab. A lot of people don't love them, which I find a bit sad because I personally do actually kind of have a soft spot in my heart for them. But I understand that. Like we're being a bit more considered with regard to that kind of stuff. But I mean, we still like to have sort of occasional mechanics that are sort of interesting like that. But I understand that the Lab has some issues.
on the topic of action bars, now there's quite a few people that clearly has never played a proper minion build, and they don't understand that it's far from lazy. But at ExileCon, you guys mentioned that obviously from what we've seen and experienced, the ones of us that played PoE2 pre-beta, was that the gameplay is very, very much more active than we have in PoE1. And on stage, you guys all said that the minion playstyle will also be more active. So I'm just very curious, specifically to the minion playstyle, how on earth are they going to make that more active than it already is? Because I have situations, just for reference here, for context, I have builds where I do not have enough slots on my action bar to put my aura. So if I die, I have to literally just change my skill bar to enable them because I have too many skills to use. So how is that going to be more active in PoE2?
You might be right. You might be right that it won't be more active, but I think that the activities you're doing should be better than the ones we have now. So I guess that's what I would say about that. I think there's there are definitely quite a lot of skills to use with minions in PoE1 as well. But yeah, I think we can do better than what we've got there. I guess I don't want to say too much here because we're going to be announcing a bunch of minion stuff later. But yeah, I guess that's my point there. Unless you've got anything else to add there, Mark.
It's too hard to explain without revealing stuff that we'll reveal. But
there's some very different mechanics going on.
Better.
It's better.
For sure.
That's basically what you told me at ExileCon. You just smiled at me and said, it'll be better, trust me, bro. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I do trust you, but I mean, a little bit of context. I just needed to have that on record.
Right. No, I understand. Well, there'll be before too long, there will be a video that will explain a lot of the stuff. And you know what? I'll have another interview with you after if you want to clarify some more specifics. Then I would say,
I'll hold you to it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So I have a question in relation to PoE2 campaign in towns. So something I noticed while I was playing through is that the only time you really experience other players, as is designed, is within the town. So you go to a town, you see other players there, but the point of the players being there, at least in my current experience, doesn't matter. They're only there to kind of give breath to the world and make it feel alive is the way it feels. They're not really there to interact with. So I'm wondering if going into PoE2, you are carrying the same philosophy of the towns and players will see them in the towns in order to just make the world feel more active, or do you have anything planned around social interaction within towns and a reason to go there as opposed to being in your Atlas, hideout and just trading with the people that come in? Is there a reason for us to go to towns continually? I guess would be my real question.
So I think I'm going to kind of divorce this into two parts here. So one of them is there a reason for other players to be in town other than seeing them? I guess probably not really, because we're kind of a game where we never like to force people to have to engage socially if they don't want to. Like, it's a thing you can do, it's fun to do that, but it's not something we sort of require. Like, we are a game, you can play multiplayer or single player, and there should be no advantage to either if we're doing our job correctly, although I'm sure many people will argue about that point, which we don't have to worry about right this second. But effectively, it is our intention that multiplayer and single player should be relatively equal as far as like wealth acquisition and power and so on goes, and therefore we don't want to kind of force people into these larger things. But I actually do agree that the town cycle in PoE1 isn't as good as it could be. And there's a few things we're actually doing to deal with that. And there's kind of it's a little bit of a mix. So one of them is that in PoE2 we actually have an NPC who will identify all the items in your inventory for free.
Oh,
we'll
wow!
Reduce the number of and we will reduce the number of scrolls of wisdoms that drop. And that will mean that is one reason to go back to town, to get all your stuff identified for free. So that's one thing. There is the flask thing as well, which is a little bit different, but I don't want the reason that you're going back to town all the time just because you need to refill your flasks all the time. Like, that needs to be something where it's like that happens sometimes, but it's not like just constant, right? It needs to be like sometimes you run out. That's a consequence of the fact that there needs to be some kind of gameplay around flasks, and so therefore there needs to be some bottoming out that can occur, and thus you go back to town to deal with that. So that should happen once in a while. But the other thing as well is gold. The vendors are not good enough in PoE1. They need to be better. Having a currency that you use with vendors means that we are putting a lot more effort into actually making the vendors matter. Like, you're going to want to check them. You're going to want to find the stuff in them. So that's something that that we're doing to try and just get that feeling of like you're going there, you're checking out that stuff. So I think that's another thing that kind of makes the town cycle a little bit stronger as well. I think probably one of the games that had the strongest town cycle to me was Diablo 1. That game just for some reason, you just like the town was so like I just remember going there every time to always check out all the vendors and stuff. That game just had a really strong town cycle for me. I think it's partly because that game, which is not something we're going to do by the way, but that game didn't really have regen. And so that meant the town was kind of like a bit more important even just from that perspective. Like there was a lot more kind of like I don't know, I don't know what the word for it is, but it's just like it was a lot more living off the land almost feeling of like, like you're struggling for every potion and so on. So the town cycle, just having a heal was a thing. Yeah, that game had a really strong town cycle. I don't think we're going to go that far. But at the same time, I do think that the town cycle in PoE1 was not strong enough, and yeah, we're trying to make it better.
Well, we've even got the gambling, which was there at ExileCon, and which is obviously use of gold, which is pretty good for like targeted upgrades. Like if you need a ring, then you gamble for a ring. Again, not so much to be utilized. Well, we'll see, but it's more of a like early game through campaign gear problem solving thing as opposed to obviously end game, which I cannot predict exactly how it will play. Obviously, if D2 is anything to go off, I mean, people did it obviously at end game as well as throughout the campaign. So who knows?
You mentioned gold, and I want to follow up on that and ask, how are you approaching the difficult balance issue of, well, gold's too scarce and I feel like I always need it. Oh, if it's too common, then I feel like the drop doesn't have any value when I receive gold. What's your philosophy behind gold acquisition and how you're approaching how much people should have at what given time?
I mean, ideally, I think it needs to feel somewhat scarce because otherwise, yeah, you don't value it as a currency. So there needs to be stuff you want to buy, right? And it needs to be that gambling is one way to make that happen. Is like there's good upgrades to get there. But I agree, we have to be a little bit careful with it. And the other thing that's important as well is we really don't want to make a gold so rare that it becomes a currency that you want to trade with. Therefore, that kind of means that the intention is not that you trade with gold. The intention is that you trade with currency, and the currency is supposed to be, by currency I mean like PoE1 chaos orbs and stuff like that. Yeah, we can't make it so rare that you kind of compromise that. It is a tough needle to thread, but I don't know. I guess you probably weren't around when we did that Ruthless with Gold League, because we did some testing around that, which I don't think exactly hit. We did a PoE1 league for that just to sort of test it out, and we learned some stuff from that. And basically, there's stuff to do there. I mean, the reason that we even added gold in the first place is just because we felt like it's something that you can drop that feels like you get a little bit of reward from something without having to drop another item that you actually have to pick up. So it's a way to kind of like bolster the feeling of drops from monsters in a nice little way there, which is and it really like we're sort of looking at things of like, okay, how many items can we have a monster drop while still without causing the kind of like ridiculous explosions that we managed to get to in PoE1. And we realized that if we wanted to kind of do it the way that we wanted to get it to, having gold, then that would mean that the number of items that you felt like you were getting, like the number of actual physical items on the ground would be too low. So yeah, as I said, gold is a way just to make it feel more rewarding in some ways with that stuff, and giving you something but also has the nice little stuff with vendors and so on that I also quite like. So I think that the other thing is, I guess it's interesting as well, is the reason why PoE1 didn't have gold. There was kind of this feeling at the time of like we wanted to get away from all of the gold sinks that games required. And so I think that we probably went maybe a little bit too far with that philosophy. Like the reason that flasks were invented was to make it so that you didn't have because you didn't have the gold sink of potions. And like the way that worked in D2. Yeah, that was the original thinking behind that. And then no repair as well, and so on. So we had all these things where like, okay, if we get rid of all the gold sinks, then we don't need gold anymore. And that was kind of an explicit goal. But I think that we threw the baby out with the bathwater a little bit too much. And I think that, it's still good. The vendoring thing is still, I think, nice. So that's kind of why we're at here.
I'll pass it to GHAZZY for the next question. Then I got one more follow-up on gold after GHAZZY's go for it.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to continue on the gold topic real quick about the original feeling that I got from testing it out and whatnot was that it was a really good way for you to be in the last act of the campaign. You realize, shit, I'm having problems. I'm gonna need to upgrade my gear, and I realize, oh, my one of my rings is from Act 1. I can go to the gambler and try to see if I can get an upgrade. Perfect.
Sure.
Then at ExileCon, I had different takes from different devs without throwing people under the bus. Some people told me that it was meant to only serve as just that. Easier gear progression during the campaign, early stages. You can gamble some loot up, and you can then try to get some easy upgrades as you progress, and then it becomes less and less relevant as further you progress in the game. And another dev told me, you can do gold find barb style plays in the game, and that's going to be a perfectly viable play style. That's something you can look forward to doing. And
I don't know who said that. I don't know who would have said that. That doesn't
So the first
sound
one is
like
the correct statement.
Yeah, the first one's more correct.
Yes.
This one's more correct. Yes.
I don't know where that second.
I don't know where.
one's come
Yeah,
from.
I don't know where that second one came from.
And I don't want to know.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't want to
that's
know
fine.
where it came from.
Right.
Oh, good. Yeah. All right. So cool.
So my follow-up to the Go then is, one of the things I learned, because I just started doing the solo self-found, hardcore, and all that stuff. And what I was really kind of excited to find out was that you can use the vendors to kind of trade your currency around, and acquire the different pieces you need. So how are you approaching, because it sounds like the Go is specifically for you to make vendors a little bit more useful. You've mentioned this a couple of times in different interviews. So I'm wondering, how are you making sure you don't step on the toes of the vendors being important in that part of the game of acquiring currency and trading it? How are you approaching the Go that is now a primary source for the vendors? Are we keeping the same mechanic of being able to exchange currency, and I got this, so I can exchange it for this, and the knowledge helps out your solo self-find grind, etc.?
I do actually think that we should retain some of those kind of like currency to currency type recipes, because I don't think if we put a price in gold on currency, I worry that will break things in the economy in a way that I don't like. It's a little bit hard to explain exactly why, but Chris honestly would have a much better rant about this, because he was very, very worried about this exact situation with gold and if there were gold prices for currency.
Yeah, that's a blatant no-no.
Yeah, so that's a no-no for various reasons. But effectively, I do think that having the kind of like those fixed trade things can still be useful. So I think we'll probably. I don't know if it'll be exactly in the same manner that we have right now, but there'll be something there'll be something to be able to do that kind of stuff, to effectively give a floor and that you can always use this way to get this currency item if you really need it and you're willing to, you don't want to do trade for it. There's a way to do that.
So, just a final thing on the golden before we jump to another question. Seeing as it is more for the beginner early stage of the game, can we then assume that we're not going to end up in a position where we get wasted stats like, hey, you're going to reflect 3 physical damage to attackers, or in this case, hey, you can have a % increased gold fine for endgame modifiers, or the fact that in the endgame, are we going to still drop gold if it's now going to be a less and less, inevitably a completely irrelevant stat in the endgame?
So I think that the gold sink at endgame will probably be top end gambling, like effectively like you just get an extra chance at a nice gamble. And there's some stuff around that I am now just suddenly considering. Sorry, I just had a game design thought here that I'm not going to say on stream, to do with interaction between the drop system and gambling that we need to have a discussion with after this. Because you probably understand what I'm thinking about there. Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Sure.
Whatever. Anyway, there'll be some expensive gambles you can do.
But
that'll be what you want.
We don't have a gold find stat, right?
No, we don't.
Like, we don't have that on gear at all. I don't know where that's coming from.
No, I'm just asking because we have irrelevant stats right now, such as that, and like region 2 HP. It's like you're never gonna notice it, so it just feels like a waste of stats.
We are. There's 2 things here, but we are working harder to make sure. Like, so I've talked about before, like light radius. Obviously, it's just a full miss stat right now in PoE 1. In PoE 2, that increases your minimap reveal radius, which is smaller in PoE 2, like by default.
Is it?
Yeah, it's a little bit smaller.
I didn't know that.
And there's another thing about that as well, which a lot of people again might see as a negative, but I actually think it's much better for just playing and exploring. Right now, like, even though you haven't revealed the radius of the minimap to see an exit to an area, and this was at ExileCon, the minimap icons will show like very, very, very far away. So you can just you can see where an exit to a level is, even though you're not even remotely close to it. Those minimap icons now only show up once you are actually close enough to reveal them in that radius. So it'll make it much harder to find points of harder. More exploration is required to find points of interest, or stacking more light radius is a way of.
I don't think this is going to be a thing that people will do. To be clear, but I think actually to your other point there, like okay, useless stats do suck, right? Like that is okay.
Yes.
There are games I could mention that have had a problem with this, of having a lot of stats you just don't care about, the values that you don't care about. So for number one, generally speaking, a stat, if it appears, should be something you can actually feel in your character, right? Like that is important. That being said, you do want to have at least a couple of misstats just because that is a thing. Like light radius was literally in the game for this reason. It's a stat that you're like in PoE 1 that's there to be like, oh crap, I got light radius, right? Like you want one or two of those. Now, I don't think that you want more than one or two of those. I think that that's enough to kind of be the kind of light radius. You know what I mean? Like you want that, like you want to exalt something, and that's what you get to be an occasional result. But another thing that we did discuss is that we were kind of like, okay, the tier 1 version. Well, I don't know what they're labeling tiers with these days, but I'm going to say tier 1. Whatever the top tier of a given stat is, should be something that you care about no matter what stat it is, right? If you're getting tier 1, like strength, that should be a thing that you, I mean, I guess people do stack strength and this or that, but you know what I mean? Like the top tier version of whatever stat it is needs to be something you actually really do feel like, oh yeah, that's awesome. Like no matter what it is, right? So like if a stat is like, I wouldn't care about it no matter how much of it I got, then that is not a good stat. With the possible exception of light radius, which, as I said, exists entirely to be a foil.
We have done some changes to the core mods on items and have considered this for sure.
Right.
I think we look explicitly at them and is like, will you ever want this?
Yes.
And if the answer is we were like, nah, like well, of course not, then I think we have, even at highest value, then we've just like, then throw it away.
Right. It's actually interesting because a rookie mistake, I think, like there's kind of a lot of these actually. There's this whole like, you know, like in the realm of more is not always better, that I feel like we touched on earlier. I think it can be a bit of a rookie mistake when designing item systems to think that, oh yeah, you want the mod pool to be just absolutely like you just want to add all sorts of shit to it. You actually do not. You want to actually, the core mod pool, like the things that can just drop on anything, you actually want to restrict quite down to a sort of quite restrictive set, because it actually makes it more fun that way when you don't have all sorts of random shit you don't understand. Like you want the actual core set to be like what's the word we were using when we were designing this? It's like something like damn it, there's a perfect word for this, but it's like core in some way. Like I feel like they're kind of there's some word like that I can't, that escapes me right now, but it's like you want the stats that are on your base items to feel like they're all kind of like major important things. Like you're not just got some random like, you know, chance to do X when Y happens when blah whatever. You know, like those are fine to have on like some special niche case that you can craft, or like some corruption outcome or some weird thing like that. But the core mod pool needs to be very simple and very understandable, which I think is important.
I mean, there's other small changes as well. Like, I mean, resistances are useful. However, a resistance coming from a weapon is something that we've removed. And so it's more about you want a good weapon. You're rolling the weapon.
Right.
The weapon's there to deal damage. It's not there to give you resistances.
Right. So having the stats be localized to individual slots is something that I think not in every case, but like they should always like that is I think another important thing about, you know, like if I want more of this, I need to concentrate on my boots, or you know, whatever it is. Like you need to the slots should have some identity there.
Yeah, and then your gloves are your hands. Your hands are used mostly for casting spells, attacking with weapons. So your gloves have more damage centric things, whereas your helmet is more about eyesight. And so you may have things to do with accuracy and critical strike chance because you can see better, or say crit multi because you can see weaknesses in the enemy, and and obviously boots movement speed because that's how you run. So having a lot of those things. So there are we've gone back and like reevaluated all that, and there are some overlaps with PoE 1, but there are
a lot of the decisions are the same because they were good decisions back when they were. But then, in fact, actually, there were some cases we just straight up removed some mods that were added later to go back more to what we had when PoE 1 first released, because like there are things that I think were too complicated that got added to the core mod pool.
So I have kind of a random thought and follow up on the itemization. You're talking about items and when they're good, it should feel good, should be, you know, part of the fundamentals of the item, etc. But you also mentioned that you're having an idea in town. because scrolls of wisdoms are going to be less. So I'm assuming we're going to have somewhat of a progression path. If we go out, we farm the gear, we go back to town, we identify them, and in that moment of identifying is when the player has the opportunity to have like a dopamine hit of like, oh, I got a good item. So have you considered during that identification time to have tiered, let's call them animations, that happen depending upon how good of items you identified? So let's say the identifier, your item has 3 or 4 tier 1s you identify. Or you got one really good one. The game can tell it's a really good one, so it has a much bigger identification. Or the guy has a better voice line related to that. Is there anything like that we can expect?
I think there is something we could do here, and so I appreciate the suggestion. Yeah, I think it's a reasonable thing I think it's a reasonable suggestion. By the way, the word I was looking for before was fundamental. You said it, and then I'm like, damn it, that's what I was looking for.
There it is.
The mods should be fundamental, is the word. So thank you for that. So two good things in one sentence there.
All right, I'll take a maybe, because I'm a dopamine addict, so I'll take the maybe.
yeah, for sure.
On the topic of modifiers and whatnot, we briefly, that we went through, I wanted to talk a little bit about crafting. I know we tackled this a little bit at ExileCon as well. I believe that the biggest take from it was that the philosophy, at least then, was that the idea was for crafting materials would never take away modifiers, except for, I believe there was Chaos Orb, which would take away one and re-add a new one or whatever it was.
No, I wouldn't say that. We're changing how they work. So Chaos Orb is remove mod, add a mod. But the philosophy around that was actually that one came about because we were saying, okay, how can we make it so that you'll actually pick up an item on the ground, like a rare from the ground, and ID it at endgame? And we've got a few changes around this, not all of which we've announced yet. But the Chaos Orb change means that currently any rare that's on the ground, it's only as good as the base type, really, because you can just alch and chaos, and it's effectively the same thing as any other item that would be from the ground. So the idea of changing chaos to remove a mod, add a mod, is just to make it so that you can pick up an item from the ground, ID it, and then it can be a near miss for something good, and then a single chaos orb can fix it. Or make it worse. But the key thing is that like you're often going to be okay, oh, this is almost a good item. I use a chaos orb. Was it good? Nah, it wasn't. But then sometimes you use it and it's like, oh shit, now it is really good. You know what I mean? So it's in order to make it so that ground items actually matter. Like that was the thing behind that. But something we kind of I'm not going to say lucked into, because it became a goal at one point as well, is that there's actually no longer any crafting in PoE 2 that requires you to just dump like ridiculous amounts of currency into something. Everything now is really more around like you use it once and carefully look, and maybe you use a few. But like with the way that Chaos Orb works now, right? Like generally speaking, like sure, you might use a few Chaos Orbs on an item, but you're certainly going to be paying attention after each one, and sometimes it'll just brick the item, and because you like, let's say for example you had like a high tier damage mod on it, but the rest of the mods were kind of lame. So you can use a few chaos orbs on that, and like if you don't remove the high tier damage, then you can make the item better. But if you like, it's likely that after a while you will remove the damage mod that you were hoping to preserve. So you might make it better, you might make it worse. But the thing is that it's no longer the case that you're just dumping a bunch of crap in until you get a certain role that you like, and that's true across all of the different currency we have.
That sounds amazing.
So there's just no more of that kind of stuff going on. It ended up being good, and that's true even for a few other systems, I guess, around where we're just making sure that we don't have that kind of like it makes the crafting better. There's that. But then also, I suppose the thing we also mentioned is that you can't rarity downgrade anymore. We removed what's called scouring, and so that kind of also means once again that you care about white items on the ground too. You actually that has that effect as well. So like that kind of changes it changes how things work quite a lot. That I think has changed the philosophy of crafting pretty significantly. And then of course there's the other crafting systems in that PoE has as well, where we're always trying to make sure that for PoE 2 we want to make sure that we isolate them a little bit more explicitly to specific domains, so that you don't have to consider every single crafting system in the game when you're crafting, say, a weapon. There might be these few crafting systems you have to consider, but you don't necessarily have to consider like these 10 other ones, if you know what I mean. So that's something, another little change that we're trying to do to kind of just like make it so that for a given weapon slot, at least you're sort of thinking a little bit more and about like you're restricting the level of amount of shit that you might have to deal with.
So, I mean, I love the fact that I don't have to spend another 300,000 alterations on an amulet, which happened back in Standard League 8 years ago. It's a little different nowadays, but it's still this whole spammage of just spinning the wheel till you hit what you need kind of approach. And it's kind of annoying for your wrist. But there's still the other problem that I think a lot of people are disliking, and it's when you have endgame content farmed, you're getting a good base item to work with, and this high item level 86 weapon can roll a tier 12 life mod or tier 12 fist damage. Is there any plans like raising the bar with the minimum tier can roll on the higher item levels to allow people to work at a more higher success rate on the higher type of item level items that they drop?
There is some information that's relevant here that we're not talking about yet because there's still some more item stuff to do. But it isn't really what you're saying. It's a sort of different thing that's just sort of relevant to what you're saying. So unfortunately, I can't really talk about that yet. But I do appreciate where you're coming from. Let's just say that. And we'll leave it at that for now.
I agree, and yes, the same hesitation as just being we're not ready to talk about it yet. Yeah. But our current plan certainly improved that problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have kind of a more broader scale type of question here. Is the PO2 or PoE2 lore and kind of setting of it a direct following of where we left off in PoE1, or do we have a different setting entirely, parallel universe? Have we gone down that route and discussed that much yet?
So we're in the same world. It's about 20 years later. There will be some characters that can come back for that reason because they're 20 years is short enough time that they can still be around, which is why we picked it. But I wouldn't say you need to have played PoE1 to sort of understand the plot of PoE2. Really, I mean, there's a lot of nods and stuff like going back to certain locations and various things like that happen. But you can certainly just play it for what it is. The storyline as such is like independent of PoE1, but it is set in the same world. Yeah.
20 years has actually proven, well, I was going to use Alva as an example, but it's nice to not have to recast the characters, the same ones we want to use. And you do want some of the same ones to appear. And it's nice to not have to completely remake them with 20 years of aging. But then I was going to use Alva as the example, but she's a kind of a time traveler anyway, so who knows what's going on there regardless. So, but yeah, there are other characters that will appear, and it's nice to not have to recast everything for them or get the same voice actor to change their style because it might not work. And but in some cases we might intentionally do that, but allowing for us to bring back some good characters, and thus 20 years, I don't know how I'll sound in 20 years. Maybe I'll sound the same, actually. I have no idea. But yeah.
Does this mean we get to kill Piety another 500 times?
Piety is gone.
Are you entirely sure? Because she keeps coming back no matter what we do.
Of the 600 bosses, I think she's 500 of them or something. No.
I figured as much.
We're done. We're done with
She is proper dead.
Yeah.
Done.
Another question I know from the community was... Sorry?
Uber piety?
Uber. There's one. Is it pre-impaled by Malachi or post?
You fight her with Malachi's scepter just impaled through her, and she's just got that there. No, anyway, continue. Sorry.
A community question is regarding the uncut gems and the gem NPC, PoE2 related skill gem acquisition. Is it something you can go deep to, or a little bit more detailed description of how that will work for the free and PoE2 in general?
I guess there's really not a huge amount to say, really. You find uncut skill gems, you use them, and you pick what gem you like. It's pretty much as simple as that. So yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. Yeah, that's it really. I mean, what else can I say?
So how is this then connected with gem rewards from quests? Is that something we're gonna see in general? acquisition throughout your campaign for class.
Right. So we actually did have a conversation recently about whether whether the NPCs, when they give you a quest reward, should just give you an uncut gem, or whether they should present to you a choice of the rewards you would get from the gem of the same level. So in general, we do, like, the uncut gem level, like the tiers of them are kind of related to the quest rewards you would get from a given quest. Like, you kind of get a quest for each one in order. But we were unsure whether or not we should actually give you the uncut gem and let you use that interface, or whether we should not do that. Because if you give someone an uncut gem, it means it's tradable. So that's kind of like a potential kind of weird thing. So that's kind of the reason why we're saying not giving an uncut and actually just giving you effectively the ability to use an uncut on that character from via that NPC, which is probably what we'll end up doing. But I mean, the tighter quest rewards is merely just that we make each tier in the gem is kind of, where you could effectively see those tiers as like the list of the quest rewards you're going to get through the game, right? Something like that.
All right, fair enough.
So a follow-up to the setting of the PoE2 question. I've noticed one question that's come up significantly in chat. People were wondering about cinematics. Can we expect cinematics throughout the campaign, or one to get us in the mood for the setting at the beginning? Anything you can share there?
I don't have anything to announce here.
Okay.
I'll just leave it at that.
All right, fair enough.
Yep.
I do have another question from the community, which was regarding weapon swap mechanic, which waves into something you and I talked about earlier, DM. And that was, I guess the issue question is MTXs. When you put your weapon on your back, is the MTX going to be visible on your back?
Yeah.
So usually speaking, so MTXs can override things on your back, depending on the MTX. So it's actually already the case with quivers, which maybe you didn't notice, that a quiver will sometimes disappear on your back if you put an MTX on. So effectively, the MTX takes priority usually over the like non-MTX thing, if that's, if it needs to. But I imagine the specifics of that will come down to the individual MTX, basically, like what, whether or not it looks like it's going to intersect too much with the attachment. And there might be some other things we can do in some cases that I haven't really considered until now, about like moving where the attachment point is or something, which I could maybe imagine us doing. Like, it's something we have to consider at least when we're building them.
That's fair. There are two more questions to the weapon swap approach, and one is in regards to, there was a question whether or not you were able to use different types of weapons for dual wielding when weapon swapping. That was apparently not possible to use two different types of melee weapons, so do a dagger and a sword or something.
Yes, so we did restrict so this was something I was very sad to see go. But yeah, in PoE 2, you can't just use like an axe and a sword on one, like you can't like have an axe in one hand and a sword in one hand. You can use them between different weapon sets, but you can't use them at the same time. And the reason why that happened was actually because when we were, so during the discussion of like all the stuff around weapon swap and all that sort of stuff, we kind of like, the whole reason we designed the new skill tree, the specialization points and all that sort of stuff, was because of the fact that we were trying to find a balanced reason to be able to use, say, an axe and a sword. And we weren't able to find one that could really work until we came up with that whole specialization point system. But what we realized when we did that was that, like, okay, well, we still haven't solved it for the case of dual wielding them at the same time. And we honestly just couldn't find a balanced way to make it really acceptable, short of having all sorts of skills that specifically call it out, which I really wasn't that keen for, because I think that it would make the skills kind of overly complicated and annoying. Like, and generally speaking, if you see a skill that's like, oh, when you're using an axe with the sword skill, then it does X or whatever, like, you kind of assume then, if you see that skill, that, oh, this should be a skill that I have to use in this situation, even though it wouldn't necessarily be the case. Sorry, I'm being a bit disorganized here with my thoughts, but effectively the issue was, yeah, as I said, we couldn't find a balanced reason to have both. So then we're like, okay, well, the amount of animations we have to make that work is like really high. Like if we actually supported that, it would probably be more animations for those cases than it would be for not those cases. So then we're kind of like, well, if there's no good reason balance wise to do this, and it's going to be a huge amount of animation work, maybe we should just drop that and not do it. And as I said, it may be a bit sad because I like the idea. Like, there are especially a few cases where I'm like, we should really be able to find a way to do like sword dagger or something like that. That's kind of cool, right? Like there are things like that I thought would be kind of cool, and maybe we will do that one day. But at least for the time being, we just decided, you know what, we're just not gonna allow heterogeneous dual wielding. So there are the cases that are specifically allowed around like scepters. Like scepters you can use with different weapon types and all things and things like that. They're not really a weapon though. But yeah, generally speaking, you can't use an axe and a sword together, and I'm sad about it, but it is a thing that didn't really have a purpose. So we're not doing it. Yeah.
Fair.
How about
The
PvP?
last one.
Oh, go. You want to go for it, GHAZZY?
Oh, I just had one last part of it, and that's snapshotting. It still exists in PoE 1, by the way. How will that work when it comes to specifically with the snapshotting of skill tree changes in reference to like spirits, the reservation mechanics, for example?
It does not snapshot. So it snapshots the but spirit reservations are reserved. Like the amount of spirit you have still has to be enough to maintain the things that you. Actually, hang on. Am I even getting that correct? Like, okay, okay, so hang on. If you got an aura, right? When you cast the aura and then you move to the other weapon set, like spirit reservations in particular, I believe, like internally, technically, you have two different skills. One of them is in weapon set 1 and one of them is in weapon set 2. And so it's like you cast it on both in both weapon sets, and then when you swap from one to the other, it technically changes one skill out for the other. This is kind of getting into the internals a little bit of the game here, but like so so snapshotting occurs for anything that isn't a spirit reservation, right? If you fire a fireball and then you change weapon set, that fireball is snapshot the stats you had when you cast it.
Mm-hmm.
But the spirit reservations, when you cast when I should say when a spirit reservation is enabled on a weapon set, it has the stats that it would have under that weapon set. Yeah, that's how it works. That's how it works. Okay, right. So there's a little bit of a complicated detail there, but I should hope that it actually, in reality, will feel intuitive when you're actually playing it. Effectively, you get the stats that you have at the point where when you're doing it. But as I said, internally, the way that works is that you've actually when you've got a spirit reservation enabled on your character, there are technically two copies of that running. One is kind of like one for each weapon set, and then the one that's running comes to the fore as you switch. Is the technical the back end of how that works.
So
for whatever that
what I'm hearing is then that snapshotting for the spirit reservation, because permanent minions, if you go back to minions as well, they will have a reservation such as auras on the spirit, so that will function the way you're saying.
Yes.
But you're also telling me that the way we snapshot or can snapshot in PoE 1, which is only limited to one specific minion nowadays, would work in PoE 2 as well, because that is a temporarily summoned minion. So you could snapshot
a temporarily summoned minion will effectively snapshot the weapon set. But the thing that I should say though is that this isn't technically snapshotting, because the way that the weapon sets are implemented is that your character at all times has multiple complete copies of your stats and all your skills loaded for each different weapon set. So actually you have two non-snapshotted weapon sets of all of your skills. Sorry, this is getting way into the deep internals, but effectively, like, if you change your items, then that will change the minion. But when you change from one set to the other, it doesn't change them, because really you have when you've got like a temporary minion skill equipped, what you've actually got is two different skills, one for weapon set A and one for weapon set B. We don't like present it that way, but that's what's going on under the hood.
Yeah.
And so, effectively, the set you cast it on it will use that set that you have.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I got you.
Right.
Makes perfect sense.
I know. To a new player, that must seem completely incomprehensible, but I can assure you that it will seem relatively intuitive when you're using it. I hope.
It's perfectly logical. It's all good.
Okay.
All right, so I have a question on a completely different topic. I actually got two of them. Right? So it seems obvious in PoE 1, at least in my experience, that PvP is not a focus of the game. It's in the game, but not really, right? So I'm assuming we're keeping the same philosophy going into PoE 2. This is not a PvP-centered game. Maybe there's an arena somewhere you can smash each other, but that's about it.
Yeah. And the reason for that is really just that we have been punished each time we try to really. Okay, I say that like it's the player's fault. It's not. It's our fault ultimately. But yes, PvP releases have not gone well for us. It has not been something the players are calling
Sure.
out for overly. So it's just kind of something that we're like, like we have no reason to worsen support for it, but we also have no reason to really like go ham on it either. Which maybe we'll try again. Maybe we'll try again one day, but not for PoE2's release. Certainly.
I guess our non-traditional form of PvP is more to do with like not that we fully embrace it nowadays. Regrettably, is racing.
Yes, racing is a form of PvP that Path of Exile has succeeded at to some degree. We should embrace it more. I'd like to do more there, but it's something that it's a bit of an unusual form of competition as far as most games go. But it has been a thing that kind of has been something that people have liked. So I'm hoping we can preserve the racing scene for PoE2 as well, for sure.
In that spirit,
does that mean,
oh, go on, GHAZZY.
I was just curious if there's any interest in reintroducing the seasonal races, which was very, very attractive back in the day with the descent races. You mentioned that earlier with Maelstrom of Chaos area.
I agree that the races were cool. The problem was just, and it's unfortunate, that we just didn't, to get like all business speak here, we just didn't have the kind of like return on investment from that, unfortunately. Like, it was cool and the community loved it, and I think in the long term probably it was a good thing to do even so, but like having to make all of the effectively cosmetic microtransactions, which is effectively what they were, like the alternate art uniques and all that sort of stuff, like having to make all that stuff and then just make sure that all of the race mods were interesting, and like just doing that whole, it was just a big amount of work, and we just didn't really have anyone internally who was able to do that work really well, who wasn't busy doing other stuff. Like, it's the kind of thing I think that we should be doing. Like, I think honestly, we should be doing it, right? I'd love to, but it's like, we just need to find the person who's going to be able to take charge of that and make it happen, without consuming too much development time, because it was really cool. But the funny thing about it is that, as cool as it was, I mean, I enjoyed it. I actually played not too much, but a little bit of that. Some of the races where it was more didn't require so much skill, I think. So I sort of enjoyed. I enjoyed doing that stuff. But funnily enough, we didn't see an increase in players when we ran race seasons. We just didn't. Which is I don't really know why that. I guess it just sort of engaged players who were already playing. So it just kind of wasn't really something that was moving the needle as far as like getting players in the door, and that's kind of why it ended. But as I said, I still like it though. Like, I want to run it. Like, I like it. So we should try and do it more, but just needs a person internally who's going to do it.
Recycle past league challenge rewards. There's the reward structure for the
races.
races.
I do not think that's a good idea, because those rewards were sold as exclusive, and they therefore need to be exclusive.
Well, they weren't sold if they were challenge rewards.
So when I say sold, I mean sold to the community, like, as in the community we're told this, and so therefore we don't want to go back on that, which is the same reason, like, we're careful around that stuff, because like that fairness of that stuff is very important. So
So in PoE2 then, because I'm hearing a lot of like custom challenge type of stuff, are we expecting the return of custom leagues? Maybe this is a question I already asked that I might have missed.
There's no reason. Yep. There's no reason we wouldn't have that. It's just absolutely a feature that we would have. I mean, it's not like hugely popular, but it's also no problem at all just to kind of have going there. There's some. I think there are probably some custom league features we could do that would improve it a lot. In fact, I honestly want to revisit that again now that I'm thinking about it, because like there's some cool shit I think we could do around that stuff. But it's just kind of another one of those features where it's like it is what it is. People who like it, and it stays how it is.
Fair enough. Well, GHAZZY, you got another question you want to follow up with?
I have one small one. Yeah, I got one small one, and it's touching a little bit about you, Jonathan, what you talked about with Crip recently, and it's the aspect of free respecs for your character progressing. And your statement, correct me if I'm wrong, was that you would prefer to see information to be provided in a more digestible and effective way to the newer player or the player themselves, so that they could make a sound assessment and a decision of their character's progression to not need the respec points to begin with. Now, I've been working personally with written guides for almost a decade, and I can tell you right now that they don't read it. They don't read the guides. So they're not going to read the tutorial in game either.
Well, to be clear, what I was referring to there was the feature we discussed earlier, where you can see when you hover over a passive point what the effect that will actually have on your character. And also, just to understand, I'm not saying we should have less respec points than we have now. We probably should have more, honestly. But I don't think that just giving out more and more respec points is the solution that the tree needs ultimately. I think that it is more to do with making sure people understand how the tree works. Which is why for features like the informational type stuff, I think is actually the better way to go. But sorry to
no, I just feel like people just don't read it. They take the POB and they think they've read the guide. And
I do think they'll read. I do think they'll read plus 25 DPS on this skill, right? Like versus this other one that's plus 10 DPS. Like they'll read that. I agree they're not necessarily going to read an information dump, but I think that there are ways to present information that players will see and appreciate. And it's just a matter of making sure that we're doing that. Like I don't think, like, I agree with you. Like, a lot of people actually suggest the things where, oh yeah, we should just give them this big screed of information about this. And I'm usually of the opinion that actually, well, once again, like, yeah, nobody reads that, right? Like, they're gonna watch you have to. They might watch a video on something if it's right in their face, and not too long and not too complicated. They might look at like a plus 20%. Plus 20 DPS like number that's there, but they're probably not going to go off and read a big screed about how some particular mechanic works. So yeah, I agree. We have to do that. But as I said, I think it's just a matter of presenting information really succinctly and well, and making sure that we can find just good little UX ways to do that.
Speaking of clarity,
I guess sorry.
Go on.
You want to go, guys?
I guess I'll take it. So I think that my question goes down to, do you really think that making sure that information is available for the players to make that decision, that assessment, is going to be enough? Because when I heard this in the interview, my reaction was, I don't think the majority of the community will feel that is a fair solution or a good enough of a solution compared to having increments of, hey, okay, you've reached this point, you can now use one free respec.
All right, well, I'll ask you this question then. Do you think you should be able to make mistakes on the passive tree?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, if that's the case then at some point there's going to be people who are unable to allocate the correct points, even regardless of what information you give them. That's just a thing that can happen. So, is the problem if people have to be able to make mistakes, then on some level, is it possible? Like, what solution? What solution? Like, if we're we're going to give them all the information that they need. If you want people to be able to make mistakes, then yeah, there's going to be that situation. I don't know what else we can do. You know what I mean? At what point do you say, at what point does it become the fault of the person allocating the points? You know what I mean? Like, if people are able to make mistakes, then there has to be a point where that is the case.
I'm going to die either way.
Where do you draw the line?
You can put in all the tips you want in the game. I'm still going to die.
Yeah. So then,
the correction to the mistake is the respec points that you do get access to. No, I absolutely buy the argument to it personally. All I was saying is that my reaction to it was that I personally didn't see that being considered a solution based on the community's reaction. But I might be wrong, and I'm happy to be wrong on this, because I think that the arguments you're presenting is more than valid, and I actually agree with you personally. I'm just trying to see from the other players.
As a random bugbear, by the way, and this is a thing that happens all the time, but it is a bugbear of mine. Is a lot of people will phrase feedback in terms of I think other people will think this, and whenever your feedback is in this way, I always kind of take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, because it's what if everyone thinks that other people will think this, right? Then it's not even a thing anymore. You know what I mean? So it's one of those funny things that that I've noticed can happen sometimes. And I always take feedback a lot more seriously when it's I think this, rather than I think other people will think this, because then it's well, then we know it's a real problem, rather than kind of I'm assuming I believe someone else might have a problem, So that's just one of those random little bugbears. And it actually happens internal to the studio as well. And I try to call people out inside, our designers in the studio will sometimes present arguments of this nature. And I'm always kind of you have to be really careful the moment that you're I'm going to assume something about other people, because it's a thing. So that's just a random. It's
very common. It's
hugely common. Yeah. This isn't just something that you do. Everyone does this, but it's just something that I always have a little thing about that.
Speaking of other people.
All of that being said,
oh, sorry, Mark.
There will still be there will still be respec points offered, right?
Yeah.
It's just then we have to answer the question: how many mistakes is it okay for someone to kind of make? And I think I can't remember how many regrets you get throughout the quests in PoE1, but like we kind of do you say that someone can make 200 mistakes, or is it more like 20, or is it more like 15? And obviously 200 is extreme. That's like 1.5 full character respecs at the end game. So like, or more. But like, yeah, you account for say 15 errors, and hopefully by that point they've learned, and that assumes no regret orbs are dropping, right? Like there are ways to then acquire for more mistakes, and it's a very, very different scenario if you're talking about like I just want to completely change my build, which it's a whole different topic. But I mean that's what re-rolling is for, I guess, generally, if you don't want to cough up the currency for it.
Speaking of a whole different topic, one of the questions I'm seeing all the time is people are wondering, it is cross-platform, but does that mean it is cross-play? Can we get some clarity on this right off the top? Console and PC interacting, yes or no?
I do want to be more clear about this, but we haven't quite gotten to the point where we can talk about it yet, unfortunately. But it is something I think is important, and I'll just leave it at that. And then we can confirm everything about details around that later on.
I tried. All I can do is try. I'll take it.
I know.
I'll take what I can get for it.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because like whenever you're dealing with other platforms, it suddenly becomes a thing where you can't just like you can't just say something when you've got like another stakeholder. You know what I mean? Like you actually have to like really. So that's why it's kind of one of those things where like, you have to really know, like, contracts must be signed and other things have to happen.
Let me shoot another one at you and see if this one's fair enough. Okay, so let's talk about talking clarity in the game. That's why I was going to start with the other question. You're talking about this earlier. Loot filters is an obvious, amazing thing I wish other games had in, because it does make the readability of the game a very high tier. Now, in going into PoE2, I'm assuming we're going to have loot filters. How about in-game customization of loot filters without having to import them from other websites? Is this something that potentially will be in PoE2? Are we expanding upon the loot filter system?
Well, honestly, I don't know that we need an in-game. Like, I don't know that we're ever going to be able to make an interface for that's better than some of the websites that exist to do that, honestly.
Fair.
Like it's one of those things where this is another one, like a very similar question people have asked in a similar nature is, hey, why isn't the trade site in the game client? And it's exactly the same thing. Like I think a website is actually a better interface for being able to do that than a game client necessarily will be. There's probably a few things we could improve feature-wise in loot filters, like just minor things to do with just some of the features around what you can mark up and a few other details like that. Like I think there's a few extra little visual styles we could add and bits and bobs like that I think could be cool. But like as far as like the actual interface for it goes, it's still just putting a file in a directory, I think is probably is fine enough for that. Of course, my hope is that you won't need a loot filter in PoE2 initially, but it's still cool to have the customization that people can do, especially when they're talking about like they're trying to find specific stuff. Like it's always good to be able to do that. So
it is certainly my hope as well that in PoE2 you will not need it beyond formatting things to look more important.
Yeah, sure.
As opposed to just hiding 99% of everything.
Because the community obviously are going to have the things of like, this is valuable, this is valuable. That's what they're deciding. And so obviously they're going to want to make loot filters that highlight, what the important shit
it's
is.
cool that like white background, red text equals expensive item. Like that is, and it's big and right in your face. And you're like, that's awesome. You immediately get that. Right. Without having to read, you immediately go like value. There's something valuable there just because you see the color.
But then we want the community to be the ones deciding what they think is valuable in that regard. So that's why the kind of like community maintain that. But ideally, you shouldn't want to have to filter items out entirely in PoE2.
How does the decision of you see somebody, you're saying like filters as an example, you see something that a third party will make where you say they do such a good job, we don't necessarily need to improve upon it. It's already there. People can use it. Whereas opposed to other things like path of building you're talking earlier, it's like we don't want to implement that in the game because this actually has negative connotations. How do you as a team come together to decide which of these you're being allowed to, okay, the third party does this better, and how do you decide which ones, well, we like what the third party are doing, but we think we should do it in the game? How does that thought process come together?
I guess a lot of so I guess the thing there would be like how many things have we actually done ourselves? And I think
the trade website.
The trade website would be one of the big ones. And that one really, I'm just trying to think back to why the motivations there were. It's kind of like there was a lot of dodgy stuff around like third party. No, that wasn't really the main part though, was it? What was there around the trade site that was kind of the main reason we did that?
I can't remember exactly, but
Yeah,
at
maybe
least
it's
like I could see a world where it's like if I think what was it? It was PoE XYZ or something at the time. Don't remember. Like if that was gone, like
Oh, I remember it now. That's right. It was all the RMT ads.
oh
Yeah, that's right.
yes.
Those third-party websites were covered in RMT ads. That was a
PoE.trade.
That was a bit of a that was a bit of a
Yeah.
You know how much money those RMT ads are paying now?
I have no idea.
It's ridiculous. All of us streamers are getting offers from it on a weekly basis. It's hilarious how much they're paying.
But even, it's funny though, because even with that one, we were like, we don't want to ban like the API. We don't want to actually like remove that. We're just like, let's just make a trade site that's better, such that we outcompete them based on that being a better trade website, which kind of ended up working in the end.
That's kind of crazy because like even ad companies are doing it, like they're being told. Even PoE Lab has had this issue where those kind of ads have snuck in, and they've been trying to work hard to make sure that doesn't come. And even then, it still sneaks in every now and then. It's almost impossible to stay away from. But it's actually active work around it.
But I mean, we sort of like I think it really just comes down to exactly what I was saying before about like the new player, like, you know, will this feel more overwhelming or less overwhelming if a new player sees this as part of the expectation? So I mean, I'm happy for those things to exist. You know, there's all sorts of like crazy tools out there. And honestly, like it would be cool if we did more effort to some APIs and things like that to allow more stuff like that to exist. I think it's fun when the community makes those tools. It really just comes down to, you know, is it new player friendly or is it not new player friendly? Like, can we do a better job or can we do a worse job? And these are the factors that go in to that, really.
But like on that topic, so can we then assume, based on what you guys just told us, that you guys are happy with the sheer quantity of third-party tools that people are utilizing, or in many cases even expected to use?
Well, okay, so there are some I certainly don't like. You know, like there are things that I think cross the line a little bit.
Any
but,
names?
Well, I don't know if I want to really do that, but you know, like sure, there are some things that I kind of don't love so much. Maybe you're more happy to name names, Mark, than I am. But
well, no, I'm not, I won't.
Yeah,
there are some tools. There are some tools that are like okay, talking about some that are not allowed. For example, look, sometimes you go and trade with someone. Sometimes I go and trade with someone. And they have unreasonably put all of that currency in the trade window faster than a human could. And I'm like, all right, that's questionable. And yeah, I could do something about it. But then I'm like, well, the fact that this many people need that is a development problem I want to fix. So, for example, I think in 3.24 we're going to be pushing for if you control shift, well, you know, you can control click all your currency into the window. If you do control shift click, it'll put all of the currency of your inventory into that trade window all in one go, right? So now you don't need to have this illegitimate third-party tool in order to do that. And
once we have that feature, then we can potentially start banning the people who use that tool.
Well, sure. I'm not to say there isn't people being banned for it or not. I'm just saying, like, I've gone and traded with someone and I see someone and, you know, like, sometimes you go into, like, 300 latency and you want to control click your entire inventory of divines or chaos into a window, and it's like with the 300 ms latency, it's like, oh my god, this is taking forever. Like, come on. And then sometimes you go to that same person to trade and they're just like, and you're like, okay, I don't know. That's questionable.
No one reports them because we love those. We love those people.
Sure,
we buy a lot of things. Nobody's reporting them.
Yeah, I know, because there's a reason we don't. There's a reason we don't ban for that.
I could easily just be like, all right, I'm just gonna become a police here, or I'm gonna be like,
but it is against terms of use, because technically you are doing multiple actions on one thing, and so that's against terms of use. But at the same time, we've kind of been like, you know, like, I mean, it would feel a bit bad for us to ban people for that, right? You know, like,
yes.
Yeah.
So,
but at the same time, we recognize, you know, so but therefore we come up with a solution to the problem. We do that, and then now it's like, well, now there's no reason for this tool to need to exist anymore, and that's an example of the kind of thing where we're kind of like, yeah, not so great.
So sometimes there's implement the tool in the game, and sometimes there's just remove the need for its existence and do it ourselves. So I mean, ultimately they achieve the same goal. I mean, another thing is the fusings and jewelers. We're going to add I guess it's more of an accessibility feature, which is that it's really only for getting 6 links or 5 links on 5 sockets and or max links and socket counts. So it won't be used for getting a 5 link on a 6 socket, but we will have it that like if you hold the fusing, you can shift click fusings to keep spamming it. If you hold it down, it will use fusings at some rate per second. I haven't determined how many it uses. I don't want it to be like
And that way you
ultra
can
fast.
6 link without having a...
Yeah. So it might be
I
faster
love
to
this.
click, but you'll save the mouse hand a little bit. It also obviously controller will get the same thing, so you can just hold down the button. It'll be like ding 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 ding. Some right. I don't know how fast it'll be. No.
Sorry, we just had someone from the community just messaging us, but hey, you're spoiling our features. But
there will be plenty of people who can see and appreciate this later as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
So a real question then, just to make sure that I heard you guys correctly, was this something that is confirmed for next league?
It is. The tasks have been sent to someone with the target version of 3.24. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
we can never promise things will be done. At least in this case, but the goal is to do so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One other spoiler. Sorry, Nick.
Hey, skip forward. Come on.
No. This is specifically for DM. I am really trying. This is a different kind of spoiler. I'm really trying to make a hideout, a microtransaction hideout at that has contained within it an entire tower defense minigame. I really want to do this. So you can hit a button and see the monsters going, and you can build blight towers.
Log in.
I want this so much, and I will try. I don't know when, but it is. I think it is.
I as the solitary Blight enjoyer in Path of Exile, will hold down that tower defense, no problem. And
if you make
go on, guys.
I just want to say, if you make sure that has like a leaderboard or something, or high scores or something, you actually make that shit engaging. Then I think we're gonna have a lot of people doing that, especially the people coming from the Warcraft 3 custom games times. For sure. Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, as we're getting towards the end of it here, I know we've been keeping you guys quite a while, so I figure we're starting to wind down now. But I wanted to give you guys an opportunity at the end here to shout out somebody on your team. Let's go, Jonathan, you, and then Mark. Can you drop one person on your team that you feel is doing a particularly amazing job lately going into the Path of Exile 2 development, and why?
My goodness, that's a real hard one to just like single out. Oh, you first, Mark.
Give a compliment. I'm digging for some positivity here. Is what I'm trying.
There's so many people though. There's so many people.
You know, I know. I reckon. You know what? Blake has been doing a real good job managing the environment team, and he doesn't. They don't honestly. The environment team don't get called out a lot because they're not responsible for gameplay.
Sure.
And so like they don't tend to come up a lot during conversations like this, but Blake, you know, he's done a real good job just managing that whole team. Like I can, you know, you can ask him for something and it just comes back great. So he is someone that I think is real good. And as I said, he doesn't get a lot of kudos because he's just, you know, environment just doesn't tend to get that as much.
Shout out to Blake.
I mean, there's too many people. I mean, you've got like Sam running that animation team amazingly. You've got Ed, who was already mentioned, doing the character animations, like all the player character animations done by Ed. Just amazing, right? You got Sam handling getting 700 monsters worth of animations done. You know, like it's ridiculous. You got Jason and the design team making pretty much every single boss, putting them together, like setting them all up. You've got Felipe doing every single player skill effect. Well, Felipe and Gabriel, but Felipe is like, you know, pushing boundaries constantly. All the awesome new VFX stuff you see is like coming from his brain, his mind, and the player skills in PoE 2 just look phenomenal.
See, you took the chicken way out, which is to name lots of people.
I know,
right?
because
it's a hard question. I know.
I'm like, you have to name one, and that's hard, right? When you have to name one, that's hard.
I mean, you got Dane making all the items, and the items look ridiculously good. You've got Joey handling the entire character art, all NPCs, all monsters, concepts. She's running that team. I don't know what to. And then okay, I'll give a special note to Tyler because he is relatively new in the grand scheme of things, and that dude is like outrageously good.
VFX.
Yes, VFX. He is just so good for being so new. Like you get these people that come in occasionally, they just have the eye for what looks awesome. He made most of the boss effects you see in I will say it's most probably, yes, of the boss effects you see in like things like all the ExileCon bosses, and just like an absolute champion when it comes to that. He did the Voodoo King in Affliction,
wow.
which again is using some awesome stuff going on there.
Well, the fact that
I
you're
don't know,
able
there's
to
too many
list
people, but-
so many of them off the top of your head, you know, inspires confidence, I suppose. And, you know, it looks like you guys enjoy the team.
Oh, 100%.
For sure.
It is very important to me and to us, I guess, that we know who everyone is and exactly what they're doing. And we talk to these people almost every single day. Our style isn't middle management. We talk to someone who tells everyone else. Like, we talk to these people, we engage with these people all the time. And it makes it just the level of passion going on here is just amazing. And you see it in these people. We certainly give them the opportunity to, you know, shine. Hopefully they see it that way as well. But at least I feel that happened. I mean, I can speak to that because that was me, right? You might not know this, DM, some people do, but like 11 years ago, I started as QA in this company.
Oh, really?
And now I am one of the game directors and currently like running PoE 1 and alongside Jonathan for PoE 2.
Mark likes to tell the story about how I wasn't going to hire you.
Yeah, he wasn't going to hire me. To be fair, not his fault. I walked in and these guys just asked me some questions in the middle of the room, and I didn't know this was the interview. And then I was like, and they were like, "Sweet, thanks for coming in." I left, and I was like, "Okay, well, I didn't get that job." And I just thought it was a casual conversation. I didn't realize it was.
I mean, that's because casual conversations are how we do interviews.
Now I know this is how things happen, but my my expectation of how companies worked was very different to how this one works. So. Anyway,
it's all good, man. My first
awesome.
interview, I showed up in pajamas because I didn't know it was an interview, and I did not get hired. In case you were wondering, so yeah, I've had similar experiences. But yeah, I want to thank you guys for your time. I want to thank the whole team, all the people you mentioned, and I really appreciate you answering some questions. I know we had probably some hard ones. We had maybe a little bit more softer questions in there too, but it was enjoyable to have the 2 hours and change you guys have shared with us here today. So thank you for that. And last thoughts or anything you want to mention here at the end as we're wrapping up?
I think we're good.
No, thanks to everyone, including you guys, obviously. And good luck with killing the rest of the Ubers. I have been watching all of your boss kill videos, DM, and I really enjoyed your Cirrus one. Yeah, it's good fun to watch.
Yeah, I'm after this, I'm doing hardcore solo self-found. It's a character I'm working on now, and if I die, I have to gift 100 subs, and I'm trying to make my way to Beat Shaper. So that's the current goal, and it's been a fun progress learning Path of Exile. And GHAZZY, you got any last mentions, call outs, anything you got going here, brother?
No, Previ got me roped into playing a bow build, so I'm doing Bama, and Bombardment is crazy good. Whoever designed that, chef's kiss, dude. Holy shit, dude. I don't think I've ever enjoyed a bow build this much in my entire life, and I played this game for a decade. So I'm very happy with that. Outside of that, thanks so much for joining. You'll find Darth Microtransaction on Twitch, GHAZZY TV on Twitch. You'll find this entire video, if you didn't catch it from the beginning, on youtube.com/GHAZZY TV as well. Big shout out to both you guys for joining in, Jonathan and Mark. And we will have another one with Jonathan after the reveal of the witch, apparently. Booked and confirmed.
Ship it and clip it, boys.
Ship it and clip it.
All right. Thank you so much for this, and we will see you next time.
Awesome.
Thank
See
you.
you later. Bye.
Cheers.